What's up, guys? Welcome to Arcane Paradox. We've got something special today. Gringotts soul scan on Harry at age 10 found 9 Horcrux Shards and International Court arrested Dumbledore. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Audit. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not the usual sort of letter, no barn owl, no Hogwarts seal, nothing that would make Petunia Dursley clutch her pearls and hustle Harry out of the kitchen before Vernon could see. This one came by a bird Harry had never seen before, something between a hawk and a raven with eyes like hammered gold, and it dropped a thick envelope of creamy parchment directly into Harry's cereal bowl at 6:15 in the morning before anyone else was awake. Harry fished it out. Dried it on his sleeve. Read it. Mr. Harry James Potter, heir to the ancient and noble house of Potter, you are hereby formally requested to present yourself at Gringotts Wizarding Bank, Diagon Alley, London, on the 14th of August, for the purpose of a mandatory inheritance audit and sole attestation as required under the International Magical Inheritance Accord of 1847. Failure to appear will result in the temporary freezing of all Potter family accounts and the appointment of a ministry-assigned account manager. Your presence is expected at 9 o'clock sharp. Account Manager, Sharpfong Gringotts Bank, London. Harry read it twice. Then he read the postscript, which was written in slightly smaller, slightly more careful script than the rest. Come alone if you can manage it. Bring nothing that was given to you by Albus Dumbledore. He stared at that last line for a long moment. Then he folded the letter, tucked it into the waistband of his too large jeans, Dudley's cast-offs, 3 sizes wrong, and went back to eating his cereal, which was now slightly soggy from the envelope. He thought about the postscript while he chewed. Come alone. Bring nothing from Dumbledore. He didn't own anything from Dumbledore. He barely owned anything at all. Getting to Diagon Alley alone at 10 years old was, in theory, the sort of thing that should have been impossible. In practice, Harry had been navigating impossibility since he was old enough to walk. He told Aunt Petunia he was going to the library. She told him to be back by tea. That was the entirety of their conversation, which was actually more than they managed most mornings. He was out the door by 7:30 with £4.50 in his pocket and his letter in his waistband. The night bus was not, technically, supposed to pick up unaccompanied minors. The conductor, a spotty young man named Ernie, told Harry this while simultaneously holding the door open for him, so Harry didn't take the objection particularly seriously. He paid his fare, held on to a brass bedpost while the bus lurched violently through 3 counties, and arrived in the leaky cauldron at 8:47, which gave him time to tap the correct brick in the back wall himself. He'd watched it done once, from a distance, through a gap in a door, and the memory had stuck the way useful things did with Harry, and walked through into Diagon Alley. It was busy for a Tuesday morning. Witches and wizards moved up and down the cobblestones with the particular kind of purposefulness that meant they all had somewhere important to be and weren't interested in small boys who looked like they'd slept in their clothes, which Harry basically had. He walked straight down the middle of the alley with his hands in his pockets and his eyes up, not dawdling, not staring, looking at everything in the unhurried way of someone who intends to remember it all later. Gringotts rose at the end of the alley like a dare. White marble, goblin guards at the doors, steps worn smooth by a century of foot traffic. Harry walked up them, nodded to the nearest guard, who did not nod back, but whose eyes tracked him with an interest that felt different from hostility, pushed through the bronze doors and then the silver doors beyond, and found himself in the main hall. It smelled like stone and gold and something underneath both of those things, something older and harder to name. Dozens of goblins worked at the long counters, heads down, quills scratching. The noise was a controlled kind of clatter. Harry walked to the nearest counter where a goblin was not actively engaged with a customer and said, simply, I have an appointment with Sharpfong. My name is Harry Potter. The goblin looked up. It took him in from boot to hairline with the kind of comprehensive assessment that made Harry feel briefly like a document being reviewed for errors. Then the goblin slid off his stool, said, Follow me, and led Harry through a side door before Harry could say anything else. The corridor beyond was narrower and quieter, lit by bracket torches that burned a dim copper color. The goblin led him down 2 flights of stairs and through a door that required the goblin's palm pressed against it before it would open, into a room that was larger than Harry expected, circular, lined with shelves of leather-bound ledgers, with a desk at the center where another goblin sat. This one was old. Harry could tell in the same way you could tell with trees, something in the weight of him, the economy of his movement, the way he looked at Harry like he was reading a page he'd already read before and finding new things in it anyway. He had iron-gray hair pulled back from a face that was all angles, and his hands on the desk were still. "Sit," said Sharp Fong. Harry sat. "You came alone. Your letter suggested it." "It was a suggestion," Sharp Fong said. "Most people ignore suggestions that inconvenience them." "Most people had somewhere more comfortable to wait," Harry said. He wasn't being rude. It was just accurate. Something moved in Sharpfang's expression, not quite a smile, but an adjacent thing. He opened a ledger in front of him and said, "You understand what an inheritance audit involves?" "Not entirely." "Your letter mentioned a soul attestation." Harry paused. "I don't actually know what that is." "It is a diagnostic procedure," Sharpfang said. "Gringotts has performed them since the 14th century, originally to verify that the heir presenting a claim was genuinely who they said they were and not a polyjuiced impostor or a summoned shade. In the modern era it serves additional purposes, detecting enchantments, compulsions, or other magical tampering that might affect an heir's legal capacity to manage an estate. He paused. It also detects certain other conditions. What kind of conditions? Sharpfang looked at him steadily. It was anonymously requested, Mr. Potter. The request came with sufficient documentation to compel us to act under our obligations to the Accord. I want you to understand that we did not initiate this to cause disruption. Harry had the distinct sense that the goblin was bracing for something. The thought settled in his chest with a kind of calm clarity. Whatever this was, it was already real. The scan hadn't happened yet and it was already real because someone had gone to the trouble of compelling a Gringotts audit through international law, and that meant whatever they expected to find, they were very sure it was there. "All right," Harry said. "What do I need to do?" Sharpfang stood, and 2 other goblins Harry hadn't noticed, they'd been standing by the shelves in the shadows, came forward. One carried a shallow silver basin on a velvet cushion. The other carried what looked like a small glass sphere on a stand, pulsing with a faint pale light. "We will take a drop of your blood for the hereditary attestation," Sharpfang said, "and then we will ask you to hold the soul sphere for approximately 1 minute. The soul sphere detects the signature of your magical core and maps its condition. It does not hurt," he added, and then amended, "it should not hurt. For someone in good health it is merely warm." Harry pressed his thumb against the silver basin when the goblin handed him a small blade. The blood welled up, dropped into the basin, and spread in a pattern that made the goblins watching it exchange glances they weren't quite quick enough to hide. Harry noticed. He didn't say anything. Then they gave him the soul sphere. It was lighter than it looked. He wrapped both hands around it the way Sharpfang indicated, and for a moment nothing happened, just warmth, just the slight pulse of the light against his palms. Then it changed. The light shifted from pale to a deep, vivid gold, and Harry thought, "Oh, that must be me, that must be what I feel like," and then 7 other colors bloomed inside the sphere, all of them wrong, all of them darker than the gold, pressing against it from the inside like fingers through cloth. He could feel them, distantly, the way you can feel a headache before it properly arrives. Something cold and ancient and hungry, fractured into pieces, each piece carrying the same rotten core. The sphere cracked. Not shattered, cracked, a single hairline fracture running from top to bottom of the glass, and the light inside guttered and then stabilized but darker than before, the gold fighting to stay visible against the pressing dark. Every goblin in the room had gone completely still. Harry set the sphere carefully on the desk. "How many?" he said. "I'm sorry," said Sharpfang, and his voice was very controlled. "The dark things inside it." How many? Harry kept his own voice level. He was 10 years old and sitting in a bank basement, and the sphere had cracked when it touched him, and he felt, not afraid, exactly. Something more complicated than fear. Something that wanted information before it decided what to be. I counted 7 colors, but there was something underneath them. Sharpfang sat back down. He was quiet for a moment that stretched. Then he said, 9. The room was silent. 9 distinct foreign soul fragments, Sharpfang said, precisely, like a doctor reading a diagnosis he had rehearsed. The fragments are of the same magical signature, that is, they all originate from a single source. They are embedded at different depths within your own soul structure. The shallowest is very close to the surface. The deepest, he paused, and something that might have been difficulty moved across his face, the deepest is significantly entangled with your core. Harry was quiet for a moment. Whose signature? We will need to run a comparative analysis to confirm. Whose signature? Sharpfang. The goblin met his eyes. Goblins did not look away from direct questions the way humans sometimes did. It was one of the things Harry found he immediately respected about them. The magical signature, Sharpfang said, is consistent with documented samples from the entity known as Voldemort. Harry breathed in. He breathed out. He turned this over in his mind the way you turn something over in your hand to check all its edges, and he thought about the scar on his forehead that ached sometimes in ways that had nothing to do with pain, and the dreams he had that felt like memories of places he'd never been, and the way Parseltongue had come out of his mouth when he was 6 years old and he'd spoken to a garden snake for 20 minutes before realizing that snakes were not supposed to talk back. He thought about the night his parents died, which he didn't remember but which he'd felt his whole life as an absence shaped exactly like a memory. 9 pieces, he thought. Someone put 9 pieces of Voldemort into me and left me with my relatives and walked away. I need to know, he said, who knew about this? Sharpfang said, carefully, that is a very good question. I'm going to need you to answer it. I can tell you, the goblin said, that the Gringotts vaults of the Potter estate have been managed since the night of October 31st, 1981, under a special dispensation granted by Albus Dumbledore, acting as your magical guardian, which suspended the usual requirement for routine soul attestation of minor heirs. He paused. The suspension was unusual. We accommodated it because our relationship with the Ministry of Magic requires a degree of cooperation. I want to be clear that we are not proud of that accommodation in retrospect. Harry stared at him. Dumbledore suspended the soul scan. Yes. And if the scan had happened at the usual time, within the first year of life? Yes. It would have been discovered immediately. Harry sat with that. He was very good at sitting with things. 11 years of neglect had made him excellent at the particular skill of absorbing information that should have devastated him and staying upright. He thought about the word immediately. He thought about all the years between immediately and now, and what had lived in those years, 9 dark things pressing against his soul like fingers through cloth. What happens now? Harry asked. That, Sharpfang said, depends on what you want to happen. It was such an unexpected thing to say, what do you want, that for a moment Harry just looked at him. People did not generally ask Harry what he wanted. The Dursleys didn't ask. The teachers at his school didn't ask, not really, not in ways that expected a real answer. The wizarding world, as far as he'd seen it, was already organizing itself around what it had decided he was, and nobody had thought to check with him first. I want the fragments removed, Harry said. All 9. And I want to know exactly who knew they were there and why they left them. And I want documentation of everything this room has produced today, in triplicate, secured in whatever the goblin equivalent of a vault is. Sharpfang looked at him for a long moment. You are 10 years old. Yes. You are handling this with remarkable composure. I'll fall apart later, Harry said. Right now I need to know what my options are. The goblin almost smiled. It was a thin thing, but it was real. There is a restoration ritual, he said. It is old, older than Hogwarts. We have performed it 3 times in recorded goblin history, for souls that have been partially consumed by dark magic. It takes 9 nights, 1 for each fragment. It is not painless. He paused again. And it will require certain permissions, under current law, because you are a minor and your legal magical guardian, is Albus Dumbledore, Harry said. Who suspended the scan that would have caught this? He looked at the cracked sphere on the desk. I don't think I'm going to be asking Albus Dumbledore for permission. Sharpfang looked at him with those old, gold eyes and said, no. I did not imagine you would be. He reached into a drawer in his desk and produced a second envelope, heavier than the first, sealed with a different kind of wax, stamped with a crest Harry didn't recognize. The anonymous party who requested this audit, he said, anticipated several possible outcomes. This document is one of the preparations they made. Harry took the envelope. The seal showed scales and a wand and, above them, a configuration of stars he didn't recognize. That, said Sharpfang, is the seal of the International Confederation of Wizards. The document inside is a formal request for an emergency welfare investigation under the International Magical Child Protection Statutes. It was prepared by a party whose identity we are not at liberty to disclose, but who is, I can tell you, not acting from malice. Harry turned the envelope over in his hands. The wax was unbroken. You're giving this to me? We are giving you the option, Sharpfang said. If you break that seal, the investigation begins automatically. The ICW will be notified within the hour. Everything that happens after that is complicated. And if I don't break it? Then you leave here today with a documented diagnosis of 9 foreign soul fragments, a very good reason to distrust your magical guardian, and no institutional support. Harry looked at the envelope. He looked at the cracked sphere on the desk, at the thin fracture running through the glass, at the dark colors still pressing faintly against the gold inside. He thought about 9 nights of ritual. He thought about Dumbledore, who had a name in his mind more like a fact than a person, the headmaster, the one who left him on the Dursleys' doorstep, the one who had organized his entire existence without, apparently, asking him a single thing. He broke the seal. The wax shattered cleanly, and the document inside unfolded itself of its own accord, and at the top of it was a date, today's date, and at the bottom was a blank line where his name would go, and below that, already filled in, a second signature in a bold and unfamiliar hand. Who signed this? Harry asked. The party who commissioned it signed as witness, Sharpfang said. Your signature activates the investigation. You are old enough, under ICW statute, to request an emergency welfare review on your own behalf. You do not need your guardian's permission for that. Of course I don't, Harry said. He's the one I'm reporting. He borrowed Sharpfang's quill and signed his name. His handwriting was neater than you might expect for someone who'd done most of his writing at a kitchen table while Dudley tried to elbow him off his chair. Harry James Potter, clear and unhurried, on the line at the bottom of the document. The parchment glowed for exactly 1 second, a warm gold, like the color that had briefly blazed in the soul sphere before the dark things came, and then it rolled itself up, sealed itself with new wax, and vanished. It's gone to Geneva, Sharpfang said. The ICW headquarters. How long until they respond? For something like this? The goblin paused. Hours. Perhaps less. Harry nodded. He looked around the circular room, the shelves of ledgers, the torchlight, the 3 goblins who had watched all of this with the careful attention of professionals who were very used to seeing extraordinary things and who had nonetheless not quite been prepared for this. He felt something in his chest that was not fear and was not anger and was not quite relief. It was more like the feeling of setting down something very heavy that you've carried so long you forgot you were carrying it, not peace exactly, because the thing still existed and now he knew about it, but a kind of clear-eyed readiness. A starting position. I have some questions about the Potter estate, he said, while I'm here. Sharpfang blinked. Then he sat back, folded his hands, and said, ask. So Harry asked. He asked about the vaults. There were 3, it turned out, a trust vault for school expenses, a secondary family vault, and a primary vault that Dumbledore's dispensation had locked to read-only access. He asked about properties. There was a house in Godric's Hollow that was technically still standing, and a cottage in Wales, and a property in Edinburgh that the ledger listed simply as the Potter Townhouse. He asked about his parents' wills, and here Sharpfang's expression shifted into something careful. The wills are sealed, the goblin said. By ministry order, on the night of November 1st, 1981. Who issued the order? It was co-signed by Bartemius Crouch Sr. and Albus Dumbledore. Harry's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Can you unseal them now? Not immediately. But with the ICW investigation active, the sealing order becomes subject to review. It is, Sharpfang said, with the precision of someone choosing their words like weapons, highly unlikely to survive review. Good. Harry stood up. He was not a tall 10-year-old, he was in fact a rather small one, all sharp angles and oversized clothes, with a scar on his forehead that was aching faintly now in the warm underground air. But he stood like someone who had decided something, and the 3 goblins in the room stood a little straighter in response. I'll need somewhere to stay while the investigation is opened. I'd rather not go back to Privet Drive tonight. Sharpfang looked at him. Gringotts does not typically provide accommodations. Is there a Potter property I can access? Even one. A pause. A very brief consultation between Sharpfang and the goblin to his left, conducted in a language Harry didn't speak but filed away with the intention of learning it later. Then, the Wales cottage. The dispensation covered only the primary and secondary vaults and the trust account. The properties were not included. The Wales cottage is listed as a secondary asset and as heir you may access it through the estate's portkey registry. Perfect, Harry said. I'll take that. It took 40 minutes to arrange, papers signed, portkey calibrated, Sharpfang sending for someone called Bonebreaker who handled property access and who looked at Harry with an expression of barely suppressed alarm for the entire transaction. Harry answered all the questions calmly, read every document before he signed it, and asked about 3 things he didn't understand until he did understand them. By the time he walked out of the circular room with a small brass key around his neck and a rolled document identifying him as the provisional resident of Cottage Finnan, Brecon Beacons, Wales, it was nearly noon. Sharpfang walked him to the door of the corridor himself, which Harry suspected was unusual. Mr. Potter, the goblin said. Harry stopped. The restoration ritual. Sharpfang paused. It is survivable. I want you to understand that. We would not offer it to you if we believed otherwise. Another pause, shorter. You are a remarkable child. I'm just paying attention, Harry said. Then, because something in the goblin's face had been honest with him all morning in a way very few things had ever been, he added, thank you. For the postscript. Sharpfang looked at him. I don't know what postscript you mean. Of course you don't, Harry said, and went back up the stairs. The main hall of Gringotts was just as busy as it had been 2 hours ago, but something had changed in the atmosphere, a subtle shift in attention, a few more glances, a goblin at the far counter who straightened when Harry came through the side door. Someone had already talked. Harry wasn't surprised. Information moved in places like this the way water moved through rock, slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. He walked out through the silver and bronze doors and back into the sun of Diagon Alley. He sat on the steps of Gringotts, because why not, and he thought for a few minutes. He thought about 9 fragments of Voldemort's soul living in his body for 10 years. He thought about the dreams he'd had, the green light, the cold laughter, the feeling of being somewhere else in his own skull. He thought about Parseltongue and the way he could sometimes sense things before they happened and the way the mirror in Dudley's room had once cracked when Harry looked into it in a moment of particularly focused anger. He thought about those things differently now. Not with horror, or not only with horror, but with a kind of retrospective clarity that felt like finally being handed the key to a room you'd been puzzling over for years. He knew what he was. He knew, roughly, how he'd gotten there. He knew who'd left him there. And he'd signed the document that was, right now, somewhere over Europe making its way to Geneva, and by tonight or possibly earlier the International Confederation of Wizards was going to know that the boy who lived had 9 pieces of Voldemort in his soul and the man who'd known it had done nothing and in fact had made it harder to find. Harry bought himself a meat pie from a vendor 2 stalls down from the steps because he hadn't eaten anything since cereal and he needed to think clearly, and he ate it standing up watching the alley. He was watching for the moment when things changed, the shift in the crowd's texture, the first owl moving too purposefully, the moment when Diagon Alley stopped being an ordinary Tuesday. It came at 12:30. He saw it first in the goblins at the door. Both of them straightened simultaneously, the way guards do when someone important is approaching, and a moment later a woman came up the alley at a pace just below running, silver hair cut short, robes the dark blue of official business, with 3 people behind her in matching robes. She had a face like a judgment and a badge on her lapel that caught the sun. She was looking at Harry before she reached the steps. "Harry Potter," she said, and her voice was the kind of voice that expected accurate answers. "Yes," Harry said. He took another bite of his pie. She stopped on the step below him, which put them at eye level. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite read, professional, yes, and controlled, but underneath those things something that looked like anger, though not at him. "My name is Amelia Bones," she said. "I'm the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. I've just received a classified communication from the ICW office in Geneva." She paused. "It referenced your name and a document you signed this morning." "That was fast," Harry said. "The document carried an emergency classification that triggered automatic notification to my office." "Mr. Potter," she stopped, and something moved through her expression again, that controlled anger pressing at the edges. "Are you all right?" It was such a direct question. Nobody had asked him that all morning, not once. He considered the question seriously, the way it deserved. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "I've had an interesting morning and I haven't finished processing it. But I'm not hurt, if that's what you mean." He paused. "Are you going to arrest Dumbledore?" Amelia Bones looked at him for another moment. Behind her, the 3 people in blue robes were very carefully not reacting to anything. Down in the alley, people had started to notice the cluster on the Gringotts steps, heads turning, pace slowing, the specific attention of a community that has learned to read official robes the way sailors read weather. "That," she said, "is what I need to discuss with you." She glanced at the growing audience below. Somewhere rather more private. Harry finished his pie, folded the paper wrapper into quarters, and dropped it in a bin by the door. "I have a cottage in Wales," he said. "Courtesy of the Potter estate." He touched the brass key around his neck. "It's private." She blinked. Then she said, "You've had a very productive morning." "I pay attention," Harry said, and stepped through the bronze doors back into Gringotts to arrange the portkey. He didn't look back at the alley, but he heard the murmur of voices that rose as he went inside, the specific sound of a crowd that has just witnessed something they don't entirely understand but intend to talk about extensively. By tomorrow, he knew, some version of this morning would be everywhere. People would get details wrong. They would add things and remove things and shape it into whatever story felt most satisfying to them. But the document was real. His signature was real. The cracked soul sphere was real, sitting in Sharpfang's circular room with 9 colors pressed against its gold. Those things were his, and nobody could revise them. He went inside. The cottage in Wales was small and dusty and smelled of disuse and something older underneath, wood smoke and lavender, a scent that felt like it had been baked into the walls over decades. Every surface was covered with a layer of settled quiet that said nobody had been here in a very long time. Harry walked through the 3 rooms while Amelia Bones' team secured the perimeter, and he noticed small things, a child's drawing pinned to the kitchen wall, faded but still visible, 2 stick figures in front of a house with a messy red scrawl beneath them that might have said home. A set of books on the sitting room shelf that included a copy of Hogwarts, a history and a Muggle paperback of the complete Sherlock Holmes, which made Harry feel an unexpected warmth toward whoever had left it there. A photograph on the mantelpiece, behind so much dust Harry had to blow it clear, of two people he recognized from no memories of his own but nonetheless knew immediately in the way you know music you've never heard before, in your bones, in the cavity of your chest. His mother's hair was vivid even in the photograph, a deep red that moved when she laughed. His father was taller than Harry had imagined and wore an expression of general insufferable delight that Harry found immediately and entirely familiar in the way mirrors are familiar. He set the photograph on the kitchen table where he could see it and went to let Amelia Bones in. She came in with one of her people, a quiet man with watchful eyes she introduced as Auror Kingsley Shacklebolt, and left the other two at the perimeter. She sat at the kitchen table across from Harry with a notepad and looked at the photograph for a moment before she looked at him. "Tell me," she said, "everything that happened this morning. From the beginning." So he did. He was thorough and he was precise and he didn't editorialize, just narrated, and she wrote steadily and Shacklebolt stood by the window and said nothing but listened like it was a professional skill, which Harry supposed it was. Harry described the letter, the bird, the soul sphere, the crack in the glass, Sharpfang's face when he said 9, the document with its ICW seal and the prepared signature at the bottom. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet. "The signed dispensation," Amelia said, and her pen was very still on the notepad, "that Dumbledore filed to suspend your soul attestation." Sharpfang confirmed this. "Yes. He told you this on record. He told me in the presence of 3 other goblins in a room that has its own documentation systems." Harry paused. "I believe Gringotts keeps records of everything that's said in those rooms." Amelia Bones looked at him steadily. "It does," she said. "That will be important." She wrote something. "Mr. Potter, what you are describing, if it is substantiated, represents a series of decisions by Albus Dumbledore that, under the Magical Child Protection Statutes and the Sorceress Welfare Act of 1962, constitute deliberate endangerment of a minor in his magical guardianship. That carries, at the international level, arrest," Harry said. She didn't deny it. "Who's going to do it?" Harry asked. "He's the chief warlock of the Wizengamot. And the supreme mugwump. Doesn't that make it complicated?" "Extremely," she said. "Which is why it will need to be the ICW, not the Ministry. And it will need to happen before he becomes more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now." Chapter 2, The Arrest. The fire in the cottage hearth was new. Shacklebolt had got it going while Amelia finished her notes, the first warmth the place had known in years, and Harry sat close to it with his knees pulled up and watched the flames while Amelia paced the length of the sitting room talking quietly into a communication mirror that buzzed with voices in French and German and at least one language Harry didn't recognize. He could hear enough to piece together what was happening. The ICW had convened an emergency session at 2 o'clock. The document Harry had signed had arrived with its full Gringotts annexes, the Soulsphere diagnosis, Sharpfang's account notes, the signed dispensation record that proved Dumbledore had known, or had at minimum acted to prevent discovery. 3 ICW senior members had requested immediate arrest authority and 2 had asked for a delay pending verification and 1 had reportedly said something in Italian that made the woman translating go very quiet. Amelia closed the mirror and looked at Harry. "They're moving on it tonight." "That's fast." "When the evidence is this clean, fast is easier to justify." She sat down across from him. "I want to prepare you for what happens after. Tonight will be manageable, we have a safe location, the ICW has agreed to joint jurisdiction, you won't be involved in the arrest itself. But tomorrow, the press," Harry said. "The press," she confirmed, "will know by morning. If not before. And it won't just be the Daily Prophet. Every wizarding outlet in Europe and several in America will have people trying to reach you." She paused. "I'd like to arrange a brief, controlled statement. Something from you, directly, before the narrative gets shaped by people who weren't in that room at Gringotts." "What would the statement say?" That would be up to you, Amelia said. Within reason. Harry thought about this. He looked at the photograph he'd brought from the mantelpiece and set on the arm of the chair, his mother laughing, his father grinning, both of them frozen at a moment that was 19 years ago and also somehow this morning. He thought about what he would want someone to say, if they were saying it on his behalf. I'll write it myself, he said. Tonight, if you can give me paper. Amelia studied him for a long moment. Shacklebolt turned from the window and looked at him too, and there was something in the big Auror's face that wasn't quite surprise, more like a recalibration, the look of someone revising a working assumption in real time. All right, Amelia said. She found him paper in her case and left him alone with it for half an hour, going back to her mirror and her colleagues and the machinery of institutional response that was grinding into motion somewhere above them. Harry sat at the kitchen table with the quill and the paper and the fire going and his parents' photograph watching from the armchair, and he wrote. He wrote 3 drafts. The first was too angry. The second was too careful. The third was honest without being weaponized, which was what he'd been aiming for from the start. He was still a 10-year-old boy in his cousin's clothes with dust in his hair, but the words on the page were precise and clear and said exactly what he meant them to say without a word of extra apology. He gave it to Amelia when she came back in and watched her read it. He watched her face. She looked up when she'd finished. You wrote this yourself? Yes. She read it again. I'd like to change one phrase. Which one? She told him. He considered it and said no, and explained why, and she held his gaze for a moment and then nodded and said, fine. We'll release it as written. Kingsley Shacklebolt made dinner out of what was in the cottage pantry, which turned out to include tins of soup and a half loaf of bread that was slightly stale and some tea, and they ate it at the kitchen table while the fire popped and outside the Welsh hills went from green to grey to dark as evening came. Harry ate properly for the first time that day and felt something loosen slightly in his chest, not resolution, not safety, just the ordinary animal comfort of food and warmth. Shacklebolt, Harry said. The Auror looked at him. He was a very large man who moved quietly, which Harry found interesting. Sir. You knew about me. Before today, I mean. It wasn't a question. He'd seen it in the man's face when they'd met, not shock, not the recalibration that Amelia had shown, but a different thing. Something more like recognition. Shacklebolt was quiet for a moment. I knew of you, he said. In the way everyone in the Order, the way everyone who fought in the war knew of you. The Order, Harry said. You mean the Order of the Phoenix? Dumbledore's organization. Shacklebolt looked at Amelia. Amelia looked at her soup. I'm not going to be upset, Harry said pleasantly. I just need to know who knew what. I was a junior member, Shacklebolt said, after a pause. Towards the end. I was 19 when the war finished. I knew your parents by reputation more than personally. Another pause. I did not know about the soul fragments. I want to be clear about that. I believe you, Harry said, because he did. The man's surprise when Amelia had relayed Gringotts' findings had been the real kind, the kind that moved through the body and not just the face. Did anyone in the Order know? Did Dumbledore tell anyone? If he did, Shacklebolt said quietly, I've never heard of it. Harry nodded and finished his soup. At 9 o'clock, Amelia's mirror buzzed 3 times in quick succession and she answered it and said very little, just yes and confirmed and understood, and then she closed it and looked at Harry and said, it's done. The fire was low. Harry looked at the shadows on the ceiling. Where? He said. Hogwarts. He was in his office. A pause. He didn't resist. Harry thought about that. Of course he hadn't. Dumbledore was too clever to resist an arrest that would only make the evidence look worse. He would cooperate with the performance of innocence and trust his ability to explain himself, because his entire career had been built on the world accepting his explanations. He would be sitting in whatever room they put him in right now, arranging his thoughts, preparing for the conversation he believed he could win. Is he surprised? Harry asked. My contact said he asked how the soul scan had been triggered, Amelia said. Without admitting he knew what a soul scan would find. Harry looked at the fire. He assumed I'd never go to Gringotts without him knowing. He assumed someone would tell him. He paused. He arranged my entire life so that everything that happened to me had to go through him first. The room was quiet. Not anymore, Harry said, and went to bed. He slept in the cottage's single bedroom on a mattress that smelled of cedar and thyme, with his parents' photograph on the windowsill where the early light would hit it, and he slept better than he had in months. No cold laughter, no green light, no sense of something else moving through his dreams like a hand through water. Whether that was because of the day, or because of the act of signing his name to something that said I will not accept this, he didn't know. He wasn't going to examine it too closely. He was up before Amelia, dressed in the same clothes because he had no others, and standing outside in the early Welsh morning when Shacklebolt came to find him. The hills were extraordinary, grey-green and enormous, the kind of landscape that made you feel the right size, which was small and fine with it. There was a stream somewhere he could hear but not see. There's tea, Shacklebolt said. I know. Harry didn't go inside. Give me 5 minutes. The Auror, to his credit, went back in without arguing. Harry stood in the wet grass in his cousin's too large clothes and breathed cold mountain air and thought about what today would be. He thought about press, and about Dumbledore in a room somewhere with people who believed they could manage this, and about 9 pieces of someone else's soul in his chest that were still there and would need to be removed by a ritual he didn't fully understand yet. He thought about Sirius Black, whose name had come up in Amelia's conversations last night, mentioned and then firmly tabled as a separate matter, and about the shape of that conversation, the way she'd said separate matter with the particular emphasis of someone who is making something separate that should not be. He filed Sirius Black away in the same mental folder as parents' wills and sealed by ministry order and went in for tea. The morning moved fast after that. Amelia had arranged a location for the press statement, not Diagon Alley, not the ministry, but the ICW's London liaison office in a building in Bloomsbury that looked like an ordinary Georgian townhouse from the outside and looked like the inside of a serious institution from the inside. All dark wood and portraits of international wizarding officials who watched you walk past with the expressions of people who had seen better centuries. Harry arrived by Portkey at 8, was offered breakfast he accepted, was offered a change of clothes he declined because the ICW's attempt to dress him in formal wizarding robes struck him as exactly the kind of image management he'd specifically decided against, and spent 20 minutes with Amelia going over the room and who would be there. 12 journalists. Selected. 3 European outlets, the Daily Prophet with Rita Skeeter who Amelia described through her teeth as unavoidable, 2 American publications, and 3 independent wizarding correspondents. No photographs during the statement, photographs after if Harry consented. 1 question each. Amelia would manage timing. You don't have to do this today, she said, for the second time that morning. It goes better if I do it before they get to fill the silence, Harry said. What story comes out if I'm not there? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I'll be fine, he said, and meant it. He was. The room was smaller than he'd expected, which helped, intimate enough that 12 people watching him didn't feel like an audience. He stood at a lectern that was slightly too tall for him and he didn't use the riser they'd placed behind it, just stood in front of it, and he read his statement in a clear and steady voice. He'd said, in the statement, 3 things. He'd said that he had visited Gringotts Bank on his own initiative to conduct an inheritance audit, which was his legal right as heir to the Potter estate. He'd said that the audit had revealed a significant and serious magical condition that required treatment, and that the treatment was being arranged. He'd said that he was cooperating fully with the ICW's welfare investigation and that he had complete confidence in the process. He did not describe the soul fragments. He did not name Dumbledore. He did not express fear or distress or any of the things that 12 journalists were clearly hoping to see in the face of a 10-year-old at a podium. He read it the way he'd written it, clear, direct, and without a tremor. When he finished, the room was very quiet for a moment, and then Rita Skeeter said, in a voice coated with synthetic sympathy, "Harry, sweetheart, can you tell us, how are you feeling about all of this?" Harry looked at her. She was exactly what he'd expected from Amelia's description, all acid green robes and quick quotes quill hovering at her elbow and a smile like a closing trap. He gave her the same attention he'd given everything today, which was full and patient and entirely unintimidated. "I'm feeling focused," he said. "Next question." Someone else, the correspondent from Le Monde Magique, a young man with sharp eyes and a notebook, said, "Can you confirm whether Albus Dumbledore's arrest is connected to your situation?" "The ICW is conducting an investigation," Harry said. "They'll be making their own statements. I'm not going to speak for them." "But do you believe, one question each," Amelia said firmly. The American from the Magical Observer asked whether Harry had legal representation. Harry said that Gringotts was managing his estate affairs and that he would be retaining a solicitor shortly, which was something he'd decided during the Portkey ride over. The ICW liaison, a precise Swiss woman named Madame Clerval who had been hovering at the back of the room, looked up sharply at that, which Harry noted and found interesting. The questions were 13 minutes of careful navigation and then it was done and Harry stepped back from the lectern and Amelia steered everyone out and Shacklebolt appeared at Harry's elbow like a large, competent shadow. "Photographs?" Amelia asked. Harry looked at the photographers gathering their equipment. He thought about what his image on the front page would say and what it should say and how much difference those two things were. "One," he said. "Standing. No posed anything." The photographer from the Prophet, not Skeeter, who did words, but a young woman who had the camera around her neck and looked slightly dazed to be in the room, took 2 shots of Harry standing against the wood-paneled wall with his arms at his sides and his chin up and his eyes level. No trembling lip, no wide devastated eyes, no child needing rescue. Just Harry Potter, who was 10 years old and had had an extremely instructive Tuesday and was not finished yet. He saw the photograph the next morning. It was on the front page of the Prophet and 5 European equivalents and an American paper, and in every version of it he looked exactly the same, small, slightly underdressed, and absolutely certain of himself. The Prophet's headline was breathless and enormous. The Magical Observer's was more measured. Le Monde Magique had found a way to convey the entire situation in 7 French words that Shacklebolt translated for him as something approximately like "the boy they thought they owned speaks first." Harry thought that was pretty accurate. The ICW formal proceedings opened in the afternoon, and Harry was not required to attend. Amelia went. Shacklebolt stayed with Harry in the Bloomsbury office, which had a library, which was where Harry spent the afternoon reading every document that Madame Clerval had been persuaded to make available to him under the Child Protection Statute's right-to-know provisions. He read about the Horcrux. He read the word for the first time in a ministry-restricted document marked Level 4 Clearance, Dark Arts Reference Archive that Madame Clerval had initially said was too sensitive for a minor and that Harry had pointed out contained information about his own body, at which point she had become very uncomfortable and produced it anyway. He read it carefully, twice, and understood most of it and made a list of the things he didn't understand to ask Shacklebolt later. He read about Sirius Black. This required significantly less official documentation and significantly more reading between lines. Sirius Black, godfather, listed in the Potter family documents as James Potter's best friend and Harry's intended legal guardian in the event of both parents' deaths. Imprisoned in Azkaban since November 1981 without trial. Without trial. Harry read that 3 times and each time the phrase sat in his chest with the weight of something that wanted to become anger if he let it. Sirius Black had never had a trial. He had been put in Azkaban on the word of people who were, Harry now knew, also the people who had sealed his parents' wills and appointed Dumbledore as his guardian and suspended his sole attestation. He had been imprisoned without trial for 9 years on the same night that those same people had decided what Harry's life would look like. Harry folded the document carefully, put it on top of his pile, and went to find Shacklebolt. The Auror was in the kitchen making tea with the focused competence of someone who finds the activity genuinely settling. He looked up when Harry came in and said, "Library didn't have what you needed." "Library had too much," Harry said. He sat down at the table. Tell me about Sirius Black. Shacklebolt set down the kettle. His expression did a complicated thing, not reluctance exactly, more like someone deciding how much of a careful path they need and then choosing honesty instead. He was your father's best friend, Shacklebolt said. They were at Hogwarts together. Black was brilliant, one of the best aurors of his generation, people said, even though he'd barely qualified before the war ended. He was devoted to your parents. And he was your godfather. And then on the night of the 1st of November 1981, Peter Pettigrew was killed in an explosion in a Muggle street and 12 Muggles died with him and Sirius Black was found at the scene laughing, and the aurors who arrived on scene arrested him immediately and he was in Azkaban by morning. Shacklebolt paused. No interrogation. No Veritaserum. No trial. Who ordered that? Harry asked. The arrest order was signed by Bartemius Crouch Sr. The same name from the sealed wills. Harry filed that carefully. Do you think he did it? Shacklebolt was quiet for a moment. He poured the tea, sat down, pushed a mug across to Harry. I think, he said slowly, that the evidence as it was presented looked very clear. And I think that in 1981, after a war that had killed a third of the wizarding population, nobody wanted to ask hard questions. Crouch made a decision and it moved fast and nobody pushed back. And now? Another pause. Now the ICW is actively reviewing every decision made in the immediate aftermath of you-know-who's, of Voldemort's, defeat. Given what's been found in your case, the credibility of those decisions is compromised. Harry drank his tea. His case needs to be part of the investigation. Formally. I've already sent a memo, Shacklebolt said, and met Harry's eyes with something that was almost a smile. Harry nodded slowly. Good. There was a knock at the front door of the building, 3 sharp raps, and Shacklebolt went to answer it, and a minute later came back with a woman Harry had not seen before. She was perhaps 30, brown-skinned and quick-eyed, with her dark hair pulled back and a leather satchel over one shoulder and the particular purposefulness of someone who had arrived with an agenda and was already several moves into it. This is Priya Chakravarti, Shacklebolt said. She's a legal advocate specializing in magical inheritance and welfare law. She was recommended. By who? Harry asked. By me, said Sharp Fong, who had, Harry now noticed, come in behind her. Harry looked at the goblin. You came in person. Certain things warrant it, Sharp Fong said. He was carrying his own document case, which looked heavy. I have the complete Gringotts record from your appointment yesterday, certified and sealed, and I have testimony from Bonebreaker and 2 other witnesses who were in the room. I also have, he said, setting the case on the table with a weight that was its own kind of statement, the original dispensation document signed by Dumbledore in 1981. We retrieved it from the archive this morning. The room was quiet. He signed it in his own name, Sharp Fong said. Not as Hogwarts headmaster. Not as chief warlock. As your magical guardian, Harry Potter. He claimed guardianship and then used that guardianship to prevent the diagnostic that would have revealed what he'd allowed to happen to you. Allowed, Harry said. Or arranged. Sharp Fong looked at him. We don't yet know the full extent of his awareness. That, he said, with the careful precision of someone who has thought about this for exactly as long as it took to walk from Diagon Alley to Bloomsbury, is what the trial will determine. Priya Chakravarti sat down across from Harry and opened her satchel and produced a set of documents that she organized with the efficiency of someone who thinks in systems. I've reviewed your situation as Sharp Fong described it, she said, briskly and without preamble, which Harry appreciated immediately. You're a minor with no living legal guardian, Dumbledore's arrest voids his guardianship claim, and no secondary guardian has been formally registered. That means you're technically a ward of the ICW until the legal situation is resolved. That's not bad, necessarily, but it does mean decisions about your welfare and medical treatment, the restoration ritual, Harry said. Among other things, technically require ICW sign-off. I'm going to argue that as a Potter heir of sufficient demonstrated capacity, you have provisional self-determination rights under the 1847 Accord Supplementary Clause. She looked up from the documents. It's a bit of an obscure argument. Will it work? She met his eyes. She had a very direct way of looking at people, as if she was running an equation behind her eyes and the answer mattered. With the right panel, yes. With the wrong one, she tilted her hand. Then we need the right panel, Harry said. Already in progress, she said, and went back to her documents. Sharpfang settled into the remaining chair with the stillness of someone who had a great deal of patience and no intention of being anywhere else, and the afternoon moved forward into early evening as they worked through the legal architecture of what needed to happen next, the provisional self-determination claim, the guardianship void, the wills that needed unsealing and the properties that needed formally transferring and the serious black situation that needed, as Harry kept quietly insisting, to be connected to the larger investigation, and was, he kept quietly insisting, connected, whether the ICW wanted to acknowledge it yet or not. At 5:30, Amelia Bones came back from the ICW proceedings looking like someone who had run a very long race and come second but was revising her strategy. He pled not guilty to deliberate endangerment, she said, sitting down heavily in the last available chair. He admitted to the dispensation. He claims his reasoning was protective, that he was aware Harry was a Horcrux target and wanted to prevent anyone using the soul scan to locate him. Harry looked up from the document he'd been reading. He's claiming he suppressed the scan to protect you, Amelia said, and the carefully neutral way she said it made it clear what she thought of that. He's claiming, Harry said slowly, that he knew I was a Horcrux host and that suppressing the scan was for my safety. Yes. So he's admitting he knew. Amelia stopped. Looked at him. Yes. He's admitted he knew. Then the question isn't whether he knew, Harry said. It's whether hiding it from everyone, including me, including whatever process might have removed the soul fragments years ago, was protective or something else. He put the document down. He left me with 9 pieces of Voldemort in my soul for 10 years. He left me with the Dursleys for 10 years. He sealed my parents' wills so I couldn't know what they actually wanted for me. He chose Sirius Black's guardian claim and Sirius Black went to Azkaban on the same night. He looked at Amelia steadily. I don't know yet if he arranged those things to happen. But I know that every single one of them went the way that kept me small and alone and dependent on him, and I know that's not a coincidence. The room was very quiet. I need to testify, Harry said. At the trial. Properly. You will, Amelia said. But that's weeks away. The preliminary hearings alone, that's fine, Harry said. I'm not going anywhere. He looked at Sharpfang. Is the restoration ritual still being arranged? The goblin healers can begin when the ICW grants provisional clearance, Sharpfang said. Your solicitor's argument may expedite that. Priya looked up from her papers and said, I've already filed the provisional self-determination claim. We should have a hearing date tomorrow. Harry nodded. He looked around the room, Amelia with her careful anger, Shacklebolt with his quiet competence, Sharpfang with his old golden eyes, Priya with her satchel full of documents and her direct, calculating gaze, and he thought about the fact that 24 hours ago he had been in Privet Drive eating soggy cereal by himself. I need 3 things, he said. Before I can sleep tonight. Everyone looked at him. First, I need someone to contact the Dursleys and let them know I won't be coming back. Not in a way that punishes them, just a clean notification. He paused. They were given custody of someone they didn't want and weren't suited for, and I don't think most of that is their fault, but I'm done there. He said it the way you say something that needed saying, without drama. Second, I need access to the Potter family vault. Not the trust vault, the full secondary vault that the dispensation blocked. Sharpfang, can that happen tonight? By morning, Sharpfang said. With the dispensation voided upon Dumbledore's arrest, the lockdown releases automatically under the accord. Good. Harry paused. Third, I need someone to formally request that Sirius Black's case be reviewed as part of the investigation. Not as a side note. Formally, in the official record, connected to mine. Amelia looked at him for a long moment. Why? What's your connection to Black? He's my godfather, Harry said. He never had a trial. The same people who made decisions about my life made decisions about his. And if he's innocent, and I think he might be, then he spent 9 years in Azkaban for something that was done to my family, and that makes it my business. He met her eyes. Are you going to tell me it isn't? She held his gaze. Then she picked up her mirror and made the call. Harry watched the fire, which was new and warm and his, in a cottage that was his, with people who had come to help because the situation had demanded it, and also, he was starting to believe, because he himself had demanded it, quietly, persistently, by knowing what he wanted and asking for it plainly, which turned out to be its own kind of power. Outside, somewhere in a building warded against the public and staffed by ICW personnel, Albus Dumbledore sat in a room and prepared his explanations. Harry had no doubt those explanations would be very good. Dumbledore had been the most trusted man in the wizarding world for 50 years, and trust that deep didn't dissolve in a day. But the document was real. The cracked soul sphere was real. 9 colors pressed against gold, and Harry's signature on the bottom of an international investigation request, and the original dispensation signed in Dumbledore's own hand. Harry had stopped needing Dumbledore's explanations before he'd ever heard them. That, he thought, was probably what the old man had never anticipated. He'd built a system around a boy he'd expected to be manageable, isolated, dependent, grateful for whatever scraps of truth were offered. He hadn't built it around whatever Harry actually was. That was Dumbledore's mistake. Harry intended to make the most of it. Chapter 3, The Restoration. The hearing took 40 minutes. Priya had told him to expect 2 hours, possibly 3, depending on which ICW panel members showed up and how much they wanted to perform their discomfort about a 10-year-old arguing for his own legal self-determination. As it turned out, the 3 panel members who showed up were a sharp-faced Norwegian witch named Magistra Voss, a Brazilian wizard called Senior Adjudicator Carvalho who had the look of someone who had seen Stranger Things before breakfast, and a Kenyan woman, Adjudicator Achin, who read Priya's filing in 4 minutes flat, looked at Harry over the top of it, and said something in Swahili that made Carvalho hide a smile. They asked Harry 6 questions. He answered all 6 without hedging and without performing distress and without looking at Priya for guidance, because he'd read the relevant statutes himself the previous evening and knew what the questions were trying to establish. He was demonstrating capacity. Fine. He had capacity. He'd had it for years. Magistra Voss asked, near the end, do you understand what the restoration ritual involves? The duration, the discomfort, the risks. 9 nights, Harry said. 1 fragment removed per night through a sustained extraction process conducted by goblin healers trained in soul restoration. The discomfort is described in the literature as significant but manageable. The risks include magical exhaustion, temporary sensory disruption, and in rare cases partial memory loss. The literature puts that last one at under 3% for cases where the host soul is intact and healthy, which mine is, around the fragments. He paused. I read the Gringotts medical summary twice. I have questions about the extraction methodology for the deepest fragment, which I'd like to discuss with the healers before we begin, but I understand the procedure well enough to consent to it. Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her colleagues. Then she signed the form. Provisional self-determination granted. Harry James Potter, age 10, declared to have sufficient demonstrated capacity to make medical decisions regarding his own treatment within the framework of the ICW welfare investigation, with Priya Chakravarti as his legal advocate and Gringotts Bank as his appointed institutional guardian for the duration. Harry thanked them, folded his copy of the ruling, and put it in his jacket pocket next to the brass cottage key. Outside the hearing room, Priya allowed herself a brief, satisfied expression and then put it away and became professional again. The goblin healers can start tonight if you want. Tonight, Harry said. You don't need to rush, 9 nights is 9 nights, Harry said. Every night I wait is another night they're in there. He didn't say it with particular heat. Just accurately. Let's start tonight. They brought him back to Gringotts through a different entrance, a side door in Nocturne Alley that Harry filed away as useful information, and down a series of corridors that went further underground than the main bank, into a part of the building that felt older and less ornamental than the marble halls above. The walls here were dressed stone, the torches were the copper-burning kind, and the air had a quality Harry couldn't name, charged, maybe, the way air feels before lightning, if lightning had a flavor that was ancient and mineral and faintly metallic. The healing suite was a circular room, because everything important in Gringotts seemed to be circular, and it was both more and less intimidating than Harry had expected. More, because it was clearly very old and very serious. The floor was covered in interlocking carved symbols that he recognized from his reading as soul map anchors, designed to hold a person's magical core stable during the extraction so that removing a fragment didn't take pieces of the host with it. Less, because there were 4 goblins in the room and they all had the manner of people who do difficult and precise work regularly and are not nervous about doing it, and Harry found competence genuinely calming. The lead healer was a goblin called Mira, older than Sharp Fong but shorter, with fingers that were astonishingly dexterous and eyes that were the color of deep water. She shook Harry's hand with a grip like iron and said, without preamble, "You said you had questions about the deepest fragment." "The extraction summary describes the deepest as significantly entangled with my core," Harry said. "Not just embedded. Entangled. That implies the fragment structure has intersected with my own rather than just sitting inside it. How do you separate something that's become structurally integrated without taking your core apart to do it?" Mira said, not unkindly. "Good question. The answer is that we don't separate it surgically. We identify the precise frequency of the foreign signature. Voldemort's soul resonates at a different magical frequency than yours, and we use a resonance divergence technique to essentially vibrate the fragment loose without touching the surrounding structure." She demonstrated with her hands, interlacing her fingers and then separating them without the fingers tangling. "It is slower than the extractions for the surface fragments. It will probably be the worst night." "Which night?" "We save it for last," she said. "9th night. The earlier extractions will have given your core more definition and stability. That makes the final one easier to navigate." Harry nodded slowly. "What do I do during the ritual?" She gestured toward the center of the carved floor, where there was a low platform set with something like a reclining chair, padded but angled, with arm rests at a specific position. "You lie still. You breathe. You don't fight it." She paused and gave him a very direct look. "That last one is harder than it sounds. The fragments will resist extraction. Some of them will feel as if they're part of you. As if removing them is a loss. That is the fragment's resistance, not your own feeling. It can be difficult to distinguish in the moment." "How do I know the difference?" She considered this as if it was a question she respected. "Your soul has a particular quality. It has been under pressure for a decade but it is, intact. Whole underneath the intrusion. When you feel the fragment resisting, hold on to the parts of yourself that are entirely yours. Memories the fragments wouldn't have. Your own feelings, your own choices." She paused. "What is the earliest memory you have that is entirely good?" Harry thought about this. Not the obvious things, his life had not had many obviously good things in it. But there was a morning when he was 7 when he'd climbed to the roof of the garden shed to escape Dudley and the weather had been perfect and he'd sat up there for 2 hours watching clouds and felt completely at peace. And there was a snake in the grass behind the school at age 6 who had told him, in that language he now knew was Parseltongue, that the sun was warm and the grass was good and existence was on the whole acceptable. And there was the first time he'd made something happen with magic, accidental, aged 5, he'd made a flower on the Desley's kitchen windowsill bloom 3 weeks out of season, and for a moment it had been the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "I have some," he said. Hold on to those, Mira said. When it gets hard, go there. She showed him to the platform. Sharpfang was in the corner. Harry hadn't realized he'd come down with them. Amelia had stayed above. Shacklebolt had offered and Harry had said no, thank you, some things didn't need witnesses. He lay back in the padded chair and looked at the ceiling, which was carved stone with the same interlocking symbols as the floor, and breathed. Ready? Mira said. Yes, Harry said. The first night began. He couldn't describe it afterward in a way that felt accurate, so he stopped trying. What he could say was that the first fragment came out like a splinter, the specific relief pain of something foreign being drawn out of flesh, except it was not flesh and it was not precisely pain. More like a sound at a frequency that made your teeth ache, except it was inside him and the frequency was the specific wrongness of Voldemort's magical signature against the grain of his own. The fragment resisted. Mira had said it would and she was right. It pressed back against the extraction, not with intelligence, it was not a thinking thing, it was a piece, a shard, a broken-off bit of something that had once been a full dark soul, but with the blind insistence of something that had taken root. Harry held on to the flower on the windowsill. He held on to the cloud-watching morning on the shed roof. He held on to the snake in the grass who had said existence was on the whole acceptable. And then the fragment came free. He felt it go. There was a sound, not in the room, not audible, but present somehow, a frequency that resonated through the carved floor and the padded chair and his own bones, and then a sudden clarity, like stepping out of a room that had always smelled of something wrong and not realizing until you were in fresh air how wrong it had been. He exhaled. In the corner, Sharpfang made a small, controlled sound that might have been relief. Harry lay still for another moment, breathing, feeling the space where the fragment had been. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like a room with one less unwanted occupant. He sat up slowly and Mira was there with a cup of something warm that tasted of honey and minerals and magic, and he drank it without being told to. One, Mira said. One, Harry agreed. He slept in the healing suite that night on a cot they brought in, because going back to the cottage and then returning the next evening was inefficient and because, honestly, he didn't want to break whatever state of focus he'd managed to find. He slept dreamlessly and woke clear-eyed and ate the breakfast Myra's assistant brought and spent the day in a small adjacent room with a stack of books and his thoughts and occasional visits from Sharpfang or Priya, who brought him documents to review and sign and in Priya's case news about the investigation's progress. The Potter wills had been unsealed. Priya brought him copies on the third day, sitting across from him in the small stone room with her hands flat on the folder and her expression doing something careful. You should know, she said, before she opened it, that the wills are very clear. And that their contents raise significant questions about several decisions made on the night your parents died. Harry opened the folder himself. James Potter's will was direct, legally precise, and had clearly been written by a man who was very aware that he might die. His estate to Lily, or to Harry if Lily predeceased him. Sirius Black named as Harry's primary guardian, with Remus Lupin as secondary. The Dumbledore name did not appear anywhere. Not as guardian, not as trustee, not as anything. Lily Potter's will was shorter. Estate to James, or to Harry. Guardian, Sirius Black. Secondary, Remus Lupin. A note at the bottom, handwritten rather than dictated, that said, under no circumstances is Harry to be placed with my sister Petunia. She cannot understand what he is and the environment would be harmful to him. Please. SB knows what to do. Harry read that last line 3 times. Please. He put the will down on the table and looked at the stone wall for a moment. He breathed. He thought about his mother writing that, knowing she might die, knowing Harry might be left alone, being specific and clear and saying please to whoever read it, trusting that it would be read. It hadn't been read. Or it had been read and ignored by the people who sealed it. Remus Lupin, Harry said. Where is he? He was a werewolf, Priya said carefully. After the war, the ministry's anti-werewolf legislation made it nearly impossible for him to hold a job or maintain stable housing. He's been surviving. A pause. We're trying to locate him. Find him, Harry said. Please. He touched the edge of the will. Both of them. Sirius and Lupin. Whatever it takes. We're working on it, Priya said. She paused. Are you all right? He thought about his mother's handwriting. The specificity of it, the love and the specific concern, the way please was a word you wrote when you were handing something to someone you trusted and hoping it was enough. It hadn't been enough. I will be, he said. After tonight. The nights built on each other. Each one was different. The second fragment was harder than the first, deeper, more established, with an ugly quality to it that the first hadn't had, something that felt like cruelty, not Harry's cruelty but something he'd absorbed without knowing it, a tendency to flinch at certain things, a reflex of suspicion that had never felt like his. When it came free he felt something shift in his chest, as if a reflex he'd been using as a habit was suddenly revealed as an intruder. He lay on the cot afterward and thought, quietly, that he had spent 10 years half inside someone else's fear, and he hadn't known it, and the flower on the windowsill had been his and only his, and the cloud morning, and the snake, those had been entirely his, and they were still his, and that was something. The third fragment came with images. Not memories, not exactly, impressions, flashes, things the dark shard had been carrying that surfaced during the extraction like sediment disturbed from the bottom of a pool. A vast dark hall. Stone floors and cold air and the sense of enormous hunger, not for food but for something else, something that went on forever. Harry watched these impressions with detached interest, the way you watch weather through a window. They weren't his. They didn't frighten him. They were just information about what had been living in him, and information was always useful. After the third night, Mira looked at him during the morning assessment with something that was definitely not just professional concern. "How are you feeling?" she said, and she meant it the way a healer meant it, which was precisely and with full expectation of an accurate answer. "Clearer," Harry said. He thought about it. "Like the volumes being turned down on something I didn't know was loud." "The fragments carry their host's emotional resonance," she said. "Voldemort's soul was, saturated with certain patterns. Fear, hunger, contempt. You will have been processing traces of those for your entire life." Harry looked at his hands. "How much of me is actually me?" It was the question he'd been turning over since the first night. He asked it plainly because Mira was the right person to ask it to. She sat across from him and didn't give him a comfortable answer, which he appreciated. "That is genuinely difficult to say. The fragment's influence is subtle, they don't replace your character, they inflect it. A tendency toward hypervigilance that your circumstances would have created anyway, but stronger. A capacity for Parseltongue that is the clearest foreign influence, that is definitely from the fragment, that is not native to you." She paused. "But your core responses, your choices, your values, the things you've decided to do in the last 3 days, those are yours. The fragments can't generate that. They can only distort the edges." "So I'm mostly me," Harry said. "You are entirely you," Mira said, with a firmness that felt clinical and also kind. "There is just less noise now." Harry nodded. He went back to his books. The days between nights settled into a routine. Morning assessments with Mira. Documents with Priya. Occasional visits from Shacklebolt, who always brought food and sometimes sat with Harry in comfortable silence, which Harry found he valued more than almost any conversation. Sharpfang stopped by in the afternoons and they had, increasingly, conversations that were less about the legal situation and more about other things, the history of goblin healing arts, the political structure of the ICW, the way the wizarding world's relationship with non-human magical communities had been shaped by centuries of deliberate misrepresentation. Harry listened to all of it and asked questions and stored the information the way he stored everything, thoroughly, with the intention of using it. On the 5th night, something unexpected happened. He was 4 fragments in, past halfway, and the ritual was running as smoothly as anything could run that involved extracting pieces of a Dark Lord's soul from a child's body. Mira had her 4 healers at their positions, Harry was in the chair, the floor symbols were lit up with their deep amber warmth, and the extraction began. And Harry went somewhere. Not physically. He was still in the chair, still breathing, still holding on to the carved armrests. But the part of him that was more than body seemed to step sideways, and he was in a place that was not the healing suite, not any room he recognized, not anywhere he had ever been. It was dark. Not frightening dark, just the dark of deep water, or deep space, or deep time. And in the dark there was something else. A presence. Not a shape, not a voice, not Voldemort, nothing so organized as that. More like a flavor in the air, something that resonated at the same frequency as the fragments being removed but was not a fragment, was something earlier and different, the ghost of a different kind of loss. And mixed with it, faintly, something warm. Something that felt like, Harry stood very still inside his own head and listened. Oh, said something that wasn't a voice but was communication. You're still here. Not directed at him. Not exactly. More like, a thought surfacing from a very deep place, something that had been pressed too far down to be coherent for a very long time. The warmth again, and sadness, and a fierce protective quality that had no object anymore but hadn't gone away. Harry said, inside wherever he was, hello. The presence shifted. Not startled, something too diffused to be startled. More like a sleeper becoming aware that the room has changed. Brave boy, said the not voice. And then, quieter, James would have done exactly this. Something in Harry's chest pulled in a way that had nothing to do with the extraction. He stood in the dark place and felt it, the warmth of something that should have been present his whole life and hadn't been, and the shape of that absence, and the shape of this presence, which was not quite enough to be a ghost and not quite nothing. He understood, suddenly and completely, what it was. Who it was. Mum, he said, and didn't care that he was 10 and alone in a goblin healing suite and crying in a place that was entirely inside his own head. The warmth expanded, briefly, like sunlight through clouds. And then it was gone, not violently, not completely, just, receding, the way something goes when it has done what it came to do. Harry sat in the dark for a moment longer, and then the extraction completed and he came back to the room and the carved floor and Myra's watchful eyes. She said nothing about his face. She handed him the cup of honey and mineral tea and waited until he'd drunk it. What was that? Harry asked, when he trusted his voice. The 5th fragment was deeper than the previous 4, Mira said carefully. When we extract at that depth, the disturbance can temporarily expose other layers of the soul's history. Impressions, primarily. A pause. Sometimes, if a very strong magical event occurred during soul formation, a sacrifice, Harry said. She sacrificed herself for me. That's a magical event. Yes, Mira said quietly. Love magic of that kind leaves marks. Not ghosts, not quite. More like, the impression of a very warm hand, long after the hand has gone. Harry looked at the ceiling. He thought about his mother writing please in her will. He thought about the warmth in the dark place. He thought about the shed roof and the clouds and the snake saying existence was on the whole acceptable. Right, he said. He breathed. Let's keep going. By the 7th night, word had reached the wider wizarding community that Harry Potter was undergoing treatment at Gringotts, and the bank had stationed 6 guards at every entrance and sent a pointed communication to the Daily Prophet stating that their patient's privacy was protected under the Goblin Healing Compact of 1612 and that any journalist found attempting to enter goblin-controlled space without invitation would be removed with the kind of prejudice that goblins were historically very good at. The Prophet printed a picture of the guards on the front page. They looked extremely competent. The journalist who'd been found attempting to bribe a goblin clerk for information about Harry's condition had been removed with an efficiency that Sharpfong described to Harry, when relaying the incident, with barely concealed satisfaction. Sirius Black's case review had been formally opened on the fourth day. Priya had sent Harry the filing confirmation, a single sheet, and Harry had read it and felt something settle slightly. It wasn't enough, not yet, not nearly, but it was motion, and motion in the right direction, which was more than Sirius Black had had in 9 years. Remus Lupin had been located. Priya was less forthcoming about the details, which meant the details were not good, and Harry let it sit for now because he couldn't do anything about it until he was done with the ritual and had his head properly clear. The 8th night was the longest. The fragment at that depth was stubborn in a different way from the others, not resistant, exactly, but entangled in a way that kept requiring Mira to adjust her approach. Harry lay in the chair for 4 hours, which was twice as long as any previous extraction, and held on to his memories with the focused tenacity of someone who had decided those things were his and was not going to let anything argue otherwise. The cloud morning. The flower. The snake. His mother's warmth in the dark place. The brass cottage key in his pocket. Sharpfang's expression when he said "You are remarkable." Amelia's controlled anger on his behalf. Shacklebolt making tea in the Welsh cottage kitchen. Priya putting the wills on the table with her hands flat on the folder. He held all of it and the fragment came loose at last, and the sound it made when it went, that non-sound, that resonance through stone, was the longest and most complicated of all of them, like a chord resolving after a very long dissonance. He slept for 14 hours. He woke on the morning of the 9th night feeling spacious. That was the only word that fit. His own mind felt larger than it had, rooms that had been crowded now opened up, thoughts moving through his head with a clarity that was almost startling. He lay on the cot and looked at the stone ceiling and thought his own thoughts, and they were, purely and entirely, his. He was not the same as he'd been a week ago. He knew that. But he also couldn't tell whether the difference was the extractions or simply 10 years of pressure being confirmed, named, and addressed. Probably both. The point was that he was himself, more completely than he'd ever been. Not purer, not softer, not easier. Just clearer. Like the volume turned all the way down on something that had always been loud. Mira brought his morning tea and sat across from him. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," he agreed. "The final fragment is the deepest and the most entangled. I want to revisit the methodology with you before we begin." She produced a diagram, a cross-section of what she'd mapped of his soul structure over the past 8 nights, updated each morning. The 9th fragment was visible at the center, surrounded by the impressions of his own magic like a seed at the core of a fruit, the foreign signature threaded through the surrounding structure in a pattern that looked like vines. Harry looked at it for a long time. He thought about what it meant that something had been at the center of him for his entire life, a piece of darkness in the most fundamental place, the earliest formed, the deepest embedded, the part that had been there before he was old enough to have memories to use as anchors. "This one," he said, pointing, "has been there since the beginning. Since the night Voldemort's curse reflected," Mira confirmed. "It embedded at the moment of impact. Your soul was newly formed." The fragment met almost no resistance because there was no established structure yet to resist it. "So it helped shape the structure," Harry said. "It grew alongside me." "In a way, yes. Which is why tonight will feel most like loss. The resonance divergence technique is," she paused, choosing words, "the right tool, but the extraction will disturb the central structure. Your core will feel, briefly, as though it's coming apart. It is not. It will restabilize very quickly. But the moment of extraction may be intense," Harry said. "Yes. I understand," he said. He drank his tea. "What time tonight?" "Midnight," she said. "The alignment is better. Your core will be at its most stable." Harry nodded. He went back to his books. He read for the rest of the day, not wizarding theory, not legal documents, not the case files Priya kept sending. He read the Muggle Sherlock Holmes that had been on the shelf in the Wales cottage, which Shacklebolt had thought to bring for him, and he read it with the focused enjoyment of someone who has temporarily set down every complicated thing in their life in order to be somewhere else for a few hours. He ate the dinner Myra's assistant brought, and he sat with Sharp Fong for a while in the late evening, and they talked about nothing in particular, goblin metallurgy, of all things, and the history of the Philosopher's Stone, which Harry found genuinely fascinating, and at 11:30 Sharp Fong stood up and said, simply, "I will be in the corner." "You don't have to stay," Harry said. "I know," said Sharp Fong. Harry went to the healing room. The 9th night was different from the moment it began. The floor symbols were all lit, all 8 healers positioned around the perimeter. Mira had brought in her full complement for this one, and Harry lay in the chair and looked at the carved ceiling and felt the first touch of the resonance divergence technique and understood immediately what Mira had meant about intensity. It was like being taken apart. Not painfully, not with violence, more like being a piece of music that is being slowly, note by note, distinguished from another piece of music that has been played simultaneously for so long both pieces had begun to blur together. He could feel his own self, the cloud morning and the flower and his mother's warmth and the snake and the choices and the clarity of the past 8 days, and he could feel the other thing, the 9th fragment, the one that had been there at the beginning, the one that had threaded itself through his earliest form structures and was not, in a very real way, separable from who he had been. It was not who he was now. He held on to that. He held on to the version of himself that had sat on the Gringotts steps and eaten a meat pie and felt, for the first time in his life, that his story was his own to tell. He held on to the signature at the bottom of the ICW document, his handwriting, his choice. He held on to "I pay attention and I'll fall apart later and come alone if you can manage it" and the fact that he had managed it. The resonance divergence went deeper. The 9th fragment resisted with everything it had, not the blind stubbornness of the others but something that felt, in its last moments, almost sentient, almost aware that it was about to cease to exist in any coherent form. Harry felt the pull of it, the sense that removing it was losing something, and then he looked at that feeling carefully, the way he looked at everything carefully, and saw it for what it was. Not his feeling. The fragment's feeling. The darkness not wanting to be extinguished. He let it go. Deliberately, consciously, the way you open your hand to release something you've been gripping too tight. The sound that came was extraordinary. It went through the stone floor and up through the chair and through him and through the ceiling and through whatever was above the ceiling all the way to the top of Gringotts and possibly beyond, the resolution of a dissonance that had existed for 10 years, and then it was gone and Harry was alone in his own head for the first time in his life, entirely and completely and with nothing else present. He lay still for a very long time. The gold light in the room, which was the light of the floor symbols at full activation, slowly faded from amber to the cool copper of ordinary torchlight. Mira was beside him. She was checking his pulse with her iron grip and looking at the diagnostic instruments around the chair and doing several other things simultaneously with the focused competence that Harry had come to find deeply reassuring. "Well," he said. His voice was rough. "All 9, she said. Clean extraction. Your core is restabilizing as expected." She held up one hand with 3 fingers extended. "How many?" "3, Harry said. He was looking at the ceiling. He felt, he didn't have the right word. Vast was too dramatic. Empty was wrong because it implied hollowness and this was nothing like hollow. It was more like a sky after clouds cleared. The same sky that had always been there, just visible now. He sat up slowly. He was not dizzy. He was not exhausted in the bone-deep way of the previous nights. He felt, frankly, more alert than he could remember feeling in his life. Sharp Fong was in the corner. His expression was doing the thing it did when he was moved, controlled, almost entirely suppressed, but present in the very slight angle of his head. "Sharp Fong," Harry said. "Mr. Potter." "Thank you," Harry said. He said it the same way he'd said it 8 nights ago at the corridor door, with the specificity of someone who means precisely what they're saying. "For all of this." The goblin was quiet for a moment. "It is our obligation under the accord, not the accord," Harry said. "For the postscript." A pause. I have previously noted that I'm unaware of any postscript. Of course you have, Harry said, and something that was entirely and completely his own moved across his face, warm and sharp and a little bit like his father's expression in the photograph and a little bit like something that had never belonged to anyone before. He stood up. The carved symbols on the floor were cooling, the room settling back into ordinary quiet, the 8 healers beginning to gather their instruments. Harry stood in the center of the soul map anchors and felt his own magic for the first time as a pure, unobstructed thing, felt the shape and weight of it, the particular quality of it, which was not what he'd expected. He'd expected, he supposed, something small. Something that had been compressed by 10 years of neglect and 9 years of foreign obstruction and the general impression given by everyone around him that he was a child to be managed. What he felt was enormous. Not reckless, not uncontrolled, precise, actually, with an edge to it like cut glass. Deep and broad and specific in the way that magic was specific to its person, carrying his own signature in the same way his handwriting carried it. And underneath it, very faint now, the resonance of his mother's sacrifice, not a fragment, not a foreign thing, but a warmth woven into the structure itself, part of the pattern, permanent. He breathed it in. He breathed it out. "When can I leave?" he said. "Tomorrow morning," Mira said. "One final assessment, documentation, and you're free." "Good," Harry said. "I have things to do." He left Gringotts the next morning at 9 o'clock through the main entrance, because there was no particular reason not to, and the goblin guards at the door watched him go with the expressions of people who have witnessed something significant and are privately satisfied about it. Sharpfang walked him to the top of the steps himself. Diagon Alley was busy. Wednesday, merchants setting up, witches and wizards moving with purpose, the ordinary pleasant noise of a place that was doing its thing. Someone recognized Harry within 30 seconds, he saw the double take, the whisper, the start of the turning to stare, and he walked through it with his hands in his pockets and his chin up and his eyes forward and the vast, clean, entirely his magic sitting in his chest like a compass needle pointing in exactly the right direction. He had 9 things to do. He'd made the list during the night. First, assess the Potter estate properly, now that the vaults were open. Second, secure Priya as permanent legal advocate. Third, get an update on Sirius Black's case and push it forward. Fourth, find Remus Lupin, whatever that involved. Fifth, review the other Horcruxes. The soul fragments had been removed from him but Voldemort's other anchor objects were still out there, and Harry had read enough about them in the Level 4 archive documents to know they were still dangerous. Sixth, prepare his testimony for Dumbledore's trial. Seventh, eat a real meal, because 9 nights of honey and mineral tea was not a diet. Eighth, go back to the whale's cottage and properly go through every room. Ninth, figure out what he wanted the next year to look like, because Hogwarts was a year away and the world was currently reshaping itself around a situation that he had initiated, and he intended to be intentional about what shape it took. He was at the bottom of the Gringotts steps when he heard his name. Harry. Not a reporter. Not an official. The voice was a woman's, and it was careful in a way that suggested the speaker had been rehearsing, and he turned and found a young woman, early 20s, brown hair, bookish robes with ink on the cuff, a face that was sharp-featured and currently arranged in an expression of extreme uncertainty. He didn't know her. And then he looked at her more carefully and the uncertainty on her face resolved into something he recognized, the look of someone who knows a great deal about a situation and is not sure they have the right to be present at it. "Sorry," she said, quickly. "I know you don't know me. My name is, I'm a researcher. With the ICW's Magical Welfare Office. I've been working on the investigation." She stopped. Then, more quietly, "My father is on the panel for Dumbledore's hearing. He told me what happened at Gringotts." "I wanted to," she stopped again. "I don't know what I wanted. I read the case files and I thought, I wanted to see that you were all right." Harry looked at her for a moment. She had ink on 3 of her fingers and a notebook in her bag and the specific energy of someone who thinks faster than they speak and is not entirely sure how to be in the world as a result. "What's your name?" he said. "Hermione," she said. "Hermione Granger." "Are you a Muggle-born?" he said, not because it mattered to him but because the combination of her surname and her robes and her manner made him curious. "Yes," she said, as if braced for something. "Good," Harry said. "I want someone who didn't grow up in this system looking at the case files. Someone who didn't learn to treat Dumbledore as an authority." He tilted his head. "Do you have time for breakfast?" She blinked. Yes. "Yes, I do." "Good," Harry said again, and started walking. "I have a list." Chapter 4, The Reckoning. The secondary Potter vault smelled like time. Harry stood at the threshold with a goblin escort and a torch and looked at what his family had accumulated over 4 centuries, shelves of books, locked cases of instruments, rolled maps, stacked trunks, and at the far end a wall of carefully preserved documents that made Priya, standing beside him, make a small involuntary sound. "Those are the family records," she said. Going back to, she squinted at the nearest label, 1402. "Later," Harry said. He was not here for history, not today. He was here for 2 specific things. He moved along the shelves with the torch while the goblin escort waited at the door with the patience of a species that measures time in centuries. The first thing he found in the 3rd trunk he opened, a locked box of dark mahogany with a Potter family crest on the lid and a letter sealed with wax laid on top of it. The letter was in his father's handwriting, dated October 1981, 1 week before the end. He opened it there in the vault, standing, by torchlight. "Harry, if you're reading this then the worst happened and someone did their job and got you here. This box has the family grimoire, some instruments you'll find useful when you're older, and a pensieve that belonged to your grandfather. It also has 12 bars of something the goblins call sunstone which is worth considerably more than I paid for it. Don't sell the pensieve. I want to tell you about the plan, the Fidelius, the safe house, all of it, but honestly if you're reading this the plan didn't work and the reasons why probably matter less than what you do next. What I know about doing next, your mother is the smartest person I have ever met and whatever she built into the magic on the night she died will hold longer than anyone expects. Sirius will find you. If he hasn't found you yet then something went wrong and you need to find him. He's your godfather and he would die for you, which is a thing I say knowing that he'd be furious at me for making it sound dramatic. He'd say something like, "James, that's not helpful, that's just descriptive." He'd be right. You're going to be extraordinary. I already know. I've been watching you manage impossible things since you were born and you do it with this particular expression that your mother says looks like me but I don't see it. I love you. Dad. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket with the brass cottage key and the self-determination ruling, which was becoming a very full pocket. The second thing he was here for was on the document wall. Priya found it before he did, she'd been working the labels while he read, and she said, "Harry," in a tone that made him come immediately. It was a file of correspondence. Letters between James Potter and his solicitor, dated throughout 1981, the last one from October 27th. Harry read them quickly and then more slowly. James Potter had been trying, in the months before his death, to file a formal challenge against Albus Dumbledore's involvement in Harry's life. Not guardianship, Dumbledore hadn't claimed that yet, had claimed it only after James and Lily were dead, but the broader question of what Dumbledore had told James about the prophecy and what he hadn't, and whether the information withheld had directly contributed to the danger his family was in. His father had known something was wrong. He'd been trying to do something about it. Harry stood in the vault and held the letters and thought about his father writing them in the months before October 31st, trying to pull at threads that would have unraveled the whole thing, and then dying before he could pull far enough. He was building a case, Priya said quietly. Yes. Harry put the letters in his bag. And now I'm going to finish it. Hermione Granger turned out to be, among other things, a genuinely extraordinary researcher. Harry had understood this within the first hour of breakfast at the Leaky Cauldron on the morning after the Restoration, when she produced from her bag 3 cross-referenced files on ICW precedent for magical guardian misconduct that were more organized and more comprehensive than anything the ICW's own legal team had given him. She had color-coded tabs. She had a summary sheet. She had noted, in the margin of the most relevant precedent, a case from 1934 that nobody else had cited and that directly supported the argument that suppressing a diagnostic test constituted deliberate deprivation under the Sorceress Welfare Act. "You did this last night?" Harry said. "And this morning," she said. "I don't sleep much when I'm working on something." "Why are you working on this?" he said, not suspiciously, genuinely curious. She had no connection to the case as far as he could tell. She put her tea down and looked at him directly, which he appreciated. "Because I'm Muggle-born," she said, "and I've been in the wizarding world for 6 months and I've already noticed that it has structural problems. And Dumbledore is one of the beams holding the structure up. If the beam is rotten, the structure is rotten." She paused. "And I read your statement. The one you gave to the press. You said you had complete confidence in the process." She looked at him carefully. "You didn't mean Dumbledore's process." "No," Harry said. "I meant whatever process actually works." She nodded once, satisfied, and picked up her tea. "What do you need?" That had been 4 days ago. Since then Hermione had been running the research track of Harry's preparation, finding precedents, cross-referencing ICW statutes, identifying gaps in the official case that the ministry's lawyers might try to exploit. She worked with Priya with the specific productive friction of 2 people who had completely different methods and completely overlapping goals, and the combination was formidable. Harry worked on the other Horcruxes. It had taken him 3 days of reading through the Level 4 archive documents, the Potter family grimoire, and a restricted text on dark object detection that Sharp Fong had quietly produced from somewhere that Harry decided not to ask about, to build a working map of what Voldemort's remaining anchors might be. He laid it out on the kitchen table of the Wales cottage on a Thursday morning with Shacklebolt and Priya and Hermione and, by the end of the first hour, Amelia Bones, who had come for a different meeting and found herself being briefed on a Horcrux hunting operation. "How," she said, looking at the map, "do you know this?" "Elimination," Harry said. "The soul fragments gave me impressions. I mentioned this to Mira but not to the ICW, so this is new to you." He pointed to the map. The third night's extraction produced visual impressions from the fragment, images the shard was carrying. "I saw a ring, a locket, a diary, and something I couldn't identify in a cave. The diary impression was the strongest, it felt most recently active, which probably means it was used at some point. The ring had something wrong about it, something layered, there's dark curse work on it beyond the Horcrux." He paused. The impressions from the other fragments were vaguer but consistent. "I think Voldemort made at least 7 objects into Horcruxes. 6 objects still exist. The 7th was the fragment in me, which is now gone." The room was quiet. Hermione had her notebook out and was writing without looking up. "I also," Harry said, and he said this carefully, "felt a living presence in one of the impressions. Not the snake, that came through differently, I mean from one of the fragments, something that should be a fixed object but felt aware. I don't know what that means yet." "Nagini," Amelia said, and when they all looked at her, "Voldemort's snake. It's been reported in Eastern Europe. We've had 3 independent sightings in the last year." She paused. "If she's a Horcrux, then she's the one we deal with last," Harry said. "When everything else is gone and Voldemort has nothing left to hide in." He looked at the map. "The diary I want to prioritize. If it's been used it means someone has it, or had it, and it can possess people, which makes it the most immediately dangerous. This is," Amelia stopped. She looked at Harry and she looked at the map and she did something with her expression that resolved into a kind of capitulation. "This is outside the formal investigation scope," she said. "Strictly speaking. The Horcruxes are the reason the soul fragments existed," Harry said. "Voldemort made them so that he couldn't truly die. He can't fully reconstitute while they exist. If we destroy them, the threat he represents is, substantially reduced. I know what they are, Amelia said, with a patience that was doing significant work. I'm saying that institutionally, an unsanctioned Horcrux hunting operation conducted by, she looked at Harry, a 10-year-old, I'll need Auror support, Harry said. For some of them. I'm not planning to do this unilaterally. Shacklebolt coughed. Kingsley, Amelia said. He's right about the diary, Shacklebolt said. If it's active, if someone has it, I have a name, Harry said. He produced from his bag a sheet of parchment with notes in his careful handwriting. From the impressions. The fragment carrying the diary image carried a name alongside it, not clearly, it was more like an emotional association. Malfoy. I don't know a Malfoy. Amelia's expression did something complicated and then went very flat. You know a Malfoy, Harry said. Lucius Malfoy, she said, is a prominent member of the Wizengamot, a significant ministry donor, and a former Death Eater who claimed under oath that he had been acting under the Imperius curse. And you believe that? Harry said. I believe, Amelia said carefully, that it was extremely difficult to prove otherwise in 1981 when the trial system was under severe pressure and several witnesses were unavailable. A pause. If Malfoy has a Horcrux in his possession, then he's harboring a dark object that is by definition connected to the ongoing threat represented by Voldemort's incomplete death, Harry said. That's an Auror matter. Nothing unsanctioned about it. He looked at her steadily. I'll point you in the right direction. You do the official part. I'll be there for the bits where official doesn't quite cover it. She looked at him for a long moment. You're 10 years old, she said, again, as if reminding herself. I know, Harry said. I was there. Hermione made a sound that was suppressed with great effort. The Malfoy Manor operation took 4 days to arrange through channels Harry was not officially part of and 2 hours to execute once Amelia had the warrant. Harry was not there officially. He was there in the capacity of an ICW welfare investigation participant with relevant information, which was a category that Priya had located in a supplementary statute and that everyone involved had agreed to treat as a technicality rather than examine too closely. The manor itself was impressive in the way that things are impressive when they've been designed specifically to impress, enormous, white, formal and an architectural language that said we have had money for longer than you have had anything. Amelia went in with 6 Aurors and a search warrant that covered every room, and Lucius Malfoy's expression, when he opened the door and saw the assembled party, went through several colors before settling on a cold, controlled fury that he deployed like a weapon. Madam Bones, he said. I trust there's an explanation for this. Warrant, she said, and handed it to him. He looked at it. Then he looked past her and saw Harry, and his expression did something more complicated. Draco Malfoy, who had appeared at his father's elbow with the automatic positioning of a child trained to stand at heel, looked at Harry with wide grey eyes and said nothing. Harry looked at Draco with the same uncomplicated attention he gave everything, took in the expensive robes and the learned not instinctive arrogance and the way the boy stood slightly behind his father with a posture that was deferential in a way that had probably been corrected into him over years, and thought, carefully set aside for later. The Aurors moved into the house. You have no right, Malfoy began. Section 14 of the Dark Object Registration Act, Amelia said, grants Auror authority to search any private residence where there is documented reason to believe an unregistered dark object is being harbored. The documentation is substantial. She smiled at him with all the warmth of a midwinter audit. Please cooperate. It was Shacklebolt who found the diary. Harry had told him where to look, not the obvious places, not the trophy room or the hidden vault behind the library, but the child's wing, specifically in a second storage trunk in the room that Draco Malfoy used as a schoolroom, tucked under a set of robes that were too small for him now. Harry had told him because the impression he'd had was of something that had been moved, hidden casually, the way you hide something you keep intending to use properly and haven't gotten around to, not the careful concealment of someone who takes their dark objects seriously but the half-attention of someone who has so many problematic possessions that this particular one had slid down the priority list. Shacklebolt came down the stairs with it in an evidence bag. Lucius Malfoy saw it and went completely still. Draco, watching from the archway, didn't understand what the diary was. Harry could see that clearly, the boy's confusion was genuine. What was not genuine was Lucius Malfoy's composure, which was held together now by nothing but years of practice. "That's not mine," he said. "It was in your house," Amelia said. "In my son's schoolroom." "I've never, Mr. Malfoy," Harry said. Everyone looked at him. He hadn't spoken until now. He was standing slightly behind Amelia and to the left, not particularly prominent, and his voice was conversational. "The diary," Harry said, "contains a piece of Voldemort's soul. It's a Horcrux. Whoever it's given to, particularly a child, someone young and trusting, it will gradually possess them while they think they're making a friend." He paused. "It was designed to be used. Did you plan to give it to someone, or were you just holding it for when someone asked for it back?" Lucius Malfoy stared at him with a hatred that was old and structural and had nothing personal about it yet. "I have nothing to say," Malfoy said, "without my solicitor." "That's fine," Harry said. "The diary says enough." Amelia had the evidence bag. The Aurors had their notes. Malfoy was being cautioned and advised of his rights by a process that was going to take significantly longer than the morning. Harry looked at Draco one more time. The boy was pale, watching his father with an expression that was trying to be blank and not succeeding, and then Harry walked out of the manor into the pale autumn morning. The diary was destroyed that afternoon by a team from the Department of Mysteries with appropriate containment, using a method that Hermione had researched and Priya had formally approved and Harry had reviewed in enough detail to be confident it was comprehensive. He was not in the room when it happened. He didn't need to be. He felt it go. A faint resonance, the same frequency as the extraction nights, but distant, an anchor dissolving somewhere in the magical architecture of whatever half-existence Voldemort was managing. Harry sat in the Wales cottage kitchen and felt it and said nothing. 2 down, counting the soul fragments as 1. 4 to go, plus the snake. The ring was in Little Hangleton. The locket was in a cave on the Cornish coast. The cup was in a Lestrange vault at Gringotts, which required a different kind of operation than the others, more politically complex, because the Lestrange vault was still technically active despite its owners being in Azkaban and Sharp Fong had to invoke an obscure clause about dark objects and validating vault privileges that had not been used in 80 years. Harry was not personally present for any of these. He provided the information, the impressions from the fragments, his map, the notes he'd been refining for 2 weeks, and Amelia's Aurors did the fieldwork, supported by ICW authorization and an increasingly irritable ministry that didn't like being coordinated around. The ring he stayed away from specifically because Hermione had identified the additional curse work on it as particularly dangerous, the kind of dark compulsion charm that would activate on touch, and activate with enough force to cause serious damage before you recognized what was happening. Shacklebolt went with a team trained in dark curse containment and they handled it with appropriate care. The locket Amelia retrieved personally, with 2 Aurors and a containment specialist. The cave was exactly where Harry's impression had suggested, though the method of getting there had required solving what turned out to be an infuriating defensive series of magical locks that the Aurors spent an afternoon working through. The cup, retrieved from the Lestrange vault with Sharpfang's claws and a goblin escort, was the most straightforward of the 4. Each destruction was the same, a specific method Hermione had established based on the research, basilisk venom being the most reliable, which created its own logistical challenges that were eventually solved with a ministry-secured sample from a reserve collection that Harry suspected he was not supposed to know existed. After each one, Harry felt the distant resonance. The fabric of whatever kept Voldemort fractionally existent, thinning. He tracked it all on the map. One by one the marks came off: ring, locket, cup, diary. For remaining, the unknown 5th object, Nagini, and something Harry still couldn't quite resolve from the impressions. He'd been turning the unclear impression over for weeks, worrying at it the way you worry at something you almost understand. It came to him in the middle of the Dumbledore trial preparation meeting, which was bad timing but impossible to control. He was sitting at the table in the Bloomsbury office with Amelia and Priya and Hermione, going over his testimony, and Hermione was saying something about the precedent she'd found for the 1934 case, and Harry's mind was half on the unclear impression, something at Hogwarts. Something old, something that had been placed there before the school was what it was now. Something in a room full of forgotten things. The room of requirement, he said. Everyone stopped. There's a Horcrux in Hogwarts, Harry said. In a room called the Room of Requirement. It's a diadem, a tiara, maybe, hidden in a room full of things people have hidden over centuries. He looked up. We need someone who knows Hogwarts well. A pause. I know a professor, Shacklebolt said slowly. If we can find him. He knows Hogwarts better than anyone living. Lupin, Harry said immediately. Shacklebolt met his eyes. He's been found, he said, and his voice was careful. It took a while. He's agreed to meet. But Harry, he's not, a pause. He's had a difficult decade. I know, Harry said. Set it up. Remus Lupin looked like someone who had been systematically erased. Not physically, he was present, he was solid, he had a face that you could see had been warm once and still was, under several layers of protective caution. But he looked like a man who had spent 10 years being progressively told he did not matter until part of him had started to believe it, which made Harry furious in a way he kept very quiet. They met in the Wales cottage because Harry had decided that the Bloomsbury office had too much institutional weight and this needed to be different. Lupin arrived at the door at 3 in the afternoon looking like he prepared himself for this meeting by telling himself several times that it would probably be fine while clearly not quite convincing himself. He was wearing robes that were clean but had been mended several times in several places and he had grey in his hair that should not have been there on a man who couldn't be more than 32. Harry opened the door and looked at him and Lupin looked at Harry and something moved across the man's face that was not at all controlled. Come in, Harry said. There's tea. They sat at the kitchen table. Harry poured. He didn't make Lupin start the conversation because he could see that Lupin was having difficulty with the fact that James Potter's eyes were looking at him from across the table, and he gave the man a moment. You look like him, Lupin said finally. His voice was quiet and had the roughened quality of someone who doesn't talk to many people. Your father. Except the eyes. Those are hers, Harry said. I know. There's a photograph. He got the photograph from the windowsill and set it on the table. Lupin looked at it for a long moment with his hands around his mug and his face doing something that was too complex to name and too honest to look away from. They told me, Lupin said, that you were safe. After. He didn't say after what. He didn't need to. Dumbledore told me. He said you were placed with Lily's sister, that you were protected and loved, and that the best thing I could do was not complicate things. His voice was steady but barely. I believed him. For a long time I believed that staying away was the right thing. That I was, what I am, would make things harder for you. You're a werewolf, Harry said. Not a problem. Lupin looked up from the photograph. It's not nothing, Harry said, but it's not the thing that should have kept you away from me for 10 years, and the reason you were kept away had nothing to do with what you are and everything to do with what Dumbledore wanted, which was me isolated and dependent. He said it without heat, just clearly. You're in my parents' wills as secondary guardian. You should have been part of my life. You weren't, and that's one of the things the investigation is about. Lupin was quiet for a long moment. How are you? He stopped. How am I so calm? Harry said. I've had a few weeks to work through it. He paused. I had 9 nights to do quite a lot of thinking. There was a moment on the 5th night, I think you might understand this, actually, when I felt something that I think was her. A trace of her, in the soul structure. And it was, he paused, finding the word, it was clear. Whatever she built into it was very clear. Lupin had gone very still. I know she trusted you, Harry said. She put you in the will. She put Sirius in the will. She wrote please and trusted that someone would read it. He met Lupin's eyes. Someone's reading it now. The cottage kitchen was quiet except for the fire. Outside, the Welsh hills were going from green to grey in the afternoon light. "How is Sirius?" Lupin asked, and his voice was not at all steady. "Alive," Harry said. "The case review has been formally opened. There's evidence, there was no trial, the arrest order was irregular, and the timing connects directly to decisions that are now under ICW investigation. It's slow but it's moving." He paused. "He's in Azkaban." He said it the way it deserved to be said, plainly, with the full weight of what it meant. "But I don't think he'll be there much longer." Lupin closed his eyes. "I need your help with something," Harry said, after a moment. "There's a Horcrux at Hogwarts. In a room called the Room of Requirement. Did you know about it?" Lupin blinked. "The Room of," he stopped. "The Come and Go Room. We, the Marauders called it the Come and Go Room." He looked at Harry. "I know where it is." "Good," Harry said. "Can you take me?" "Hogwarts is," Lupin paused. "There's a new headmistress. McGonagall. She was your mother's favorite teacher, and she is not," he considered his words, "she is not at all pleased about the events of the past month and I believe she has been waiting for an opportunity to be useful." "Call her," Harry said. "We should do this soon." The Hogwarts operation was quiet. McGonagall met them at the gates, a tall, sharp-featured Scottish woman who looked at Harry for a long moment with an expression that was doing a great deal of complicated work, and then said, briskly and with decisive finality, "Welcome to Hogwarts, Mr. Potter. I'm sorry it's taken this long." "Thank you, Professor," Harry said. "Minerva," she said. "Today, at least." She glanced at Lupin, who straightened slightly under her gaze in the way of a former student automatically reverting to school manners. "Remus. You look terrible." "It's been a complicated decade," Lupin said. "We'll discuss that later," she said, in a tone that meant they absolutely would, and turned toward the castle. The Room of Requirement was on the 7th floor, a stretch of blank wall opposite a tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy. Lupin walked past it 3 times thinking of hidden things and the door appeared, and Harry went in. The room was vast, exactly as the fragment had shown him, floor to ceiling with accumulated centuries of hidden and forgotten objects, towers of furniture and stacked books and broken instruments and things whose purpose was no longer identifiable. Harry moved through it with a torch and a detection instrument Hermione had calibrated, following the resonance he could now recognize as Voldemort's signature, the same frequency as the fragments, quieter now with 4 anchors gone but still there. He found it in 12 minutes. A diadem, perched on top of a broken wardrobe, barely visible. Grey stone, silver setting, something wrong about it in the way a note played off-key is wrong, the shape was right but the quality was poisoned. Harry looked at it without touching it. "There," he said. Shacklebolt, who had come with them, had the containment case. The destruction method was the same as the others. It took 2 minutes. Harry stood in a hidden room full of forgotten things and felt the 5th anchor dissolve, and the resonance that had been Voldemort's presence in the magical architecture of the world went thinner than it had been, thin enough now that Harry, reaching for it the way he had learned to reach for his own magic in those 9 nights, could barely find it. 1 anchor left. Nagini. And Voldemort knew it. Harry felt that too, not through any mystical connection, because the soul link had been severed with the last fragment, but through the simple logic of it. 5 anchors gone. A 6th going. Whatever fragile state of partial existence Voldemort had been maintaining in Eastern Europe was about to become untenable. "He'll move soon," Harry said, stepping out of the room. "He needs a host to reconstitute properly. He needs a body." "We have orders on the known sympathizers," Amelia said. She'd been outside. She'd come up to the 7th floor corridor when Harry emerged. "Quirrell is at the top of that list." "Who?" Harry said. Defense against the dark arts professor, McGonagall said, from behind Amelia, with the precise tone of someone whose opinion of this appointment had never been positive. He went on a sabbatical last year, supposedly to study dark creatures in Eastern Europe. He came back, different. Different how? Harry said. Nervous, McGonagall said. Nervous in a way that is unlike the man I knew. Jumpy. And he wears a turban now, which, she paused. Which I thought was an affectation. But if Voldemort needs a host, where is he? Harry said. In the castle, McGonagall said, and her face had gone to stone. They found Quirrell in the third-floor corridor, near the door that McGonagall told them had been specifically locked since September and that Quirrell had been found near 3 times in as many weeks with explanations that had not quite added up. He was standing by the locked door with his back to them when they came around the corner, and he turned, and Harry saw his face. The man's eyes were wrong. There were 2 things happening in that face and both of them were present, and the one that was not Quirrell was aware of Harry immediately, with a recognition that moved through the man's body like electricity. Potter, said Quirrell, and it was not Quirrell's voice. The turban. Harry's eyes went to the back of the man's head. He understood. Leave him, Harry said quietly. The thing inside Quirrell laughed, the cold laugh from the dreams, the one Harry had been hearing since before he could remember, and it was strange to hear it in the waking world, in a castle corridor in the afternoon, without the surrounding darkness. Strange and not frightening. You are not what I expected, said the voice, and Quirrell's body turned fully to face him. No, Harry agreed. The Aurors were behind him, Shacklebolt, 2 others, moving to flank. McGonagall was behind them with a face of controlled fury. Lupin was very still against the corridor wall. Harry had his wand. He'd bought it at Ollivander's on the morning after the hearing, because his magic was his and it needed a proper channel, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, and Ollivander had stared at him for a very long time when it chose him and said, in a strange, quiet voice, curious. Very curious indeed. Harry had asked what was curious and Ollivander had said that the phoenix who gave this feather had given only one other, and Harry had said I know and bought the wand and left. He raised it now. Quirinus Quirrell is still in there, Harry said. Not as a warning, as information, for the Aurors, for what came next. Less than you might hope, said Voldemort's voice. Enough, Harry said, and cast. Not a killing curse, not the obvious response, not the thing that would have been the expected escalation. He cast a containment charm, a soul separation ward, something Hermione had found in the advanced reference texts and that Harry had spent 3 evenings learning with a precision that had made Priya, who had witnessed one of the practice sessions, go slightly pale. The ward hit Quirrell and the man's body seized, and the thing attached to the back of his skull began to separate, unwillingly, with the same blind resistance as the soul fragments in the extraction ritual, the same rotten frequency pressing back against the charm. Harry held it. He had 9 nights of practice at exactly this. He knew what that frequency felt like under pressure and he knew how to push against it without letting it inside him. You can't, the voice began, and then changed. You don't know what I know exactly what I'm doing, Harry said, and pushed harder. The ward flared gold, his gold, the color from the soul sphere, the color of his magic without obstruction, and the presence on Quirrell's skull came free. Not completely, not with the clean finality of the Horcrux destructions, because this was Voldemort's central self, what remained of his primary soul, not an anchor object. But freed from Quirrell, it had no host, no body, no substance, and without the 5 anchor objects to fall back into it was, thin. Thinner than it had any right to be. The least it had been since the night in Godric's Hollow. Quirrell collapsed. Shacklebolt was there immediately. McGonagall summoned the school's medical staff with a crack of her wand. The disembodied presence, barely coherent, barely anything, moved in the corridor air like smoke looking for purchase and finding none, and Harry watched it with steady eyes. You need a body, Harry said. You need an anchor. You have neither. Every object you hid yourself in is gone. He paused. You can go east. You can find something weak to inhabit and exist in fragments for another decade. Or what? The voice was barely voice now. Threads. Or you face what happens when someone actually tries to help you die properly, Harry said. I have a goblin healer who understands soul work better than anyone in the world. Whatever is left of your soul, if there's enough, could be restored to some coherence before it's gone. You could die whole rather than in pieces. He said it without malice. Without mercy either. Just plainly, the way facts deserve to be stated. But that's your choice. The presence moved in the corridor air. It had no eyes but it looked at him, that thing that had once been Tom Riddle and had spent 50 years trying to be something else, and it was very thin now and very aware of how thin it was. It went east. Harry watched it go. He lowered his wand. He'll be back, Amelia said, from behind him. Yes, Harry said. But not soon. And not strong. He looked at Quirrell, who was conscious and bewildered and apparently largely intact. Get him to St. Mungo's. He's going to need some of the soul restoration work done. He paused. Tell Mira I said hello. McGonagall was looking at him with an expression that had progressed well beyond complicated and into something that might, under other circumstances, have been called pride. Mr. Potter, she said. Minerva, he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Come back in a year, she said. When it's time. There will be a place for you here. She paused. On your own terms. Harry nodded. He turned and walked down the corridor toward the staircase and the great doors and the grey October sky outside. Shacklebolt fell into step beside him. Lupin came behind. At the top of the steps, Harry stopped. Sirius, he said to Amelia, who had caught up. The case. How long? The preliminary review is done, she said. The final hearing is next week. She paused. The evidence is, Harry, it's comprehensive. The irregularities in the arrest order, the lack of trial, the testimony from the scene that was never properly taken. And Pettigrew, she stopped. Harry looked at her. Pettigrew may not be dead, she said carefully. There are irregularities in the evidence from the Muggle Street. Things that don't add up when you look at them properly. She met his eyes. If Pettigrew is alive, then he's the one who betrayed my parents, Harry said. And Sirius took the fall for it. Yes, Amelia said. Harry looked out at the grounds of Hogwarts, the lake, the forest, the sky. He thought about Sirius Black in Azkaban for 9 years for something he didn't do. He thought about his mother's handwriting. SB knows what to do. Find Pettigrew, he said. And get Sirius out. He walked down the steps into the October afternoon. One thing at a time, and then the next thing, and then the thing after that. He was only 10 years old and he had already changed the architecture of the world. He intended to keep going. Chapter 5, The Return. Sirius Black came out of Azkaban on a Thursday morning in November, which felt wrong to Harry in a way he couldn't quite articulate, as if an event this large deserved more dramatic weather, more ceremony, something other than a grey November Thursday with light rain and a smell of cold sea that came in off the water and made the dock at the mainland transfer point feel like an ordinary place doing ordinary things. It was not an ordinary place doing ordinary things. Harry stood at the dock with Amelia and Shacklebolt and Priya and Lupin, who had barely slept in the 3 days since the final hearing and whose hands were doing something involuntary at his sides that he clearly wasn't aware of. The ICW release team had gone to the island at 7 that morning. It was now 9:45 and the boat was coming back across the grey water and Harry watched it come. Lupin made a sound. Just once. Not a word. Harry didn't look at him because it seemed like the right thing not to. The boat docked. 2 ICW officers came off first. Then a healer from St. Mungo's who had gone over for the release medical assessment. And then Sirius Black. Harry had looked at photographs. He'd found 3 in the secondary vault, one of the 4 marauders together at what looked like a graduation, one of Sirius and James at a Quidditch match with their arms around each other and matching expressions of absolute triumph, and one of Sirius holding a very small baby with an expression that had no armor in it at all. He'd looked at those photographs enough to have Sirius's face memorized before he ever saw it in person. The man who came off the boat was thinner than the photographs and had 9 years in his eyes that the photographs didn't, and he moved with the particular careful quality of someone relearning that they have a body and the world is not trying to take it from them. He was wearing clean robes that the ICW had provided and they were slightly too large. His hair was long and not yet recovered from prison and his face was all angles and shadows. He came off the boat and stood on the dock and looked at the mainland as if he wasn't entirely sure it was real. Then he looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Sirius Black crossed the dock in about 4 steps and then stopped, just stopped, 2 feet away, and looked at Harry with an expression that was doing too many things simultaneously to catalogue. Harry could see him cataloguing, the eyes, which were Lily's, the hair, which was James's, the face, which was its own thing, and the fact that Harry was standing on a dock in November looking back at him with the steady unflickering gaze that was also, apparently, its own thing. "You're so small," Sirius said. His voice was rough. "I thought you'd be," he stopped. "You were a baby. You were so," another stop. "Hello," Harry said. Something broke open in Sirius Black's face. Not beautifully, not the clean cinematic kind. The messy, raw kind, where a person has been holding something together for a very long time and the reason to hold it together has just stopped being a reason and now it just falls. He went to his knees on the dock, which Harry suspected had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with sudden structural failure of a different kind entirely, and his hands came up to his face. Harry stepped forward and put his arms around the man's shoulders. He was 10 years old and Sirius was a grown man and the geometry was awkward, but Harry held on anyway and felt Sirius shaking, and he thought about 9 years in Azkaban for something you didn't do, 9 years with Dementors and no one coming, and he held on. Lupin arrived behind him and then it was both of them, the 3 of them on the dock in the November rain, and Harry listened to Lupin say, "Pat foot," in a voice that was barely functional and held on. He held on until Sirius's breathing steadied. Then he let go and stepped back and said, practically, "There's a car. Shacklebolt's driving. The cottage has heat." Sirius looked at him from his knees on the dock. "Are you always like this?" he said, and his voice was rough and wondering and not at all steadied yet. "Like what?" Harry said. "Like," Sirius gestured vaguely, which seemed to encompass Harry's general existence. "I don't know," Harry said. "I've only been me." He offered his hand. Sirius took it and stood up. The Wales cottage was not designed for 5 adults and 1 child. It became home anyway. Lupin had been there since the Hogwarts operation and had already, quietly, and without being asked, fixed 3 things that had been slightly wrong with the plumbing and organized the bookshelf in a way that made significantly more sense and started what appeared to be a minor renovation of the kitchen hearth that McGonagall had apparently heard about and supplied materials for, because a parcel had arrived from Hogwarts with a note that just said Remus. For the love of something, eat. With a supply of food that was enough for a week. Harry had read the note and put it on the table and said nothing because McGonagall had clearly been looking for a direction to aim her concern about Lupin and he was not going to get in the way of that. Sirius spent the first 2 days mostly sleeping, which Shacklebolt had told Harry to expect and which Harry let happen without comment or hovering. He ate when he woke, which was inconsistent but improving. By the 3rd day he was up in the morning and sitting in the kitchen with tea when Harry came down, and they had the first of many conversations at the kitchen table that were not quite like anything Harry had had with anyone before. "Tell me everything," Sirius said, on that 3rd morning. Harry told him everything. He was thorough and sequential and he didn't soften anything, because Sirius was not a person who needed things softened and treating him as if he did would be an insult. He told him about the Gringotts letter and the Soul Sphere and the 9 fragments and what Sharp Fong had said about the dispensation. He told him about the ICW document and the cottage and Amelia and the restoration ritual. He told him about the impressions from the fragments, the vault and the cave and the ring, and the hunt, and Hogwarts, and what had happened in the third-floor corridor with Quirrell. Sirius listened to all of it without interrupting, which Harry suspected cost him something because Sirius Black was not, he was learning quickly, a naturally non-interrupting person. When Harry finished, Sirius was quiet for a moment. "You're 10, he said. "Everyone keeps saying that," Harry said. "Because it keeps being true," Sirius said. He looked at Harry with an expression that had anger in it and grief and something fiercely warm. "He left you with Petunia." His jaw tightened. "How were they?" "Not cruel in the memorable sense," Harry said, which was honest. "Just absent. I was in the way. There wasn't enough of anything." He paused. "The cupboard was the sleeping arrangement for several years." Sirius went very still. "It's fine," Harry said. "It's over." "It's not fine," Sirius said, very quietly, and something in his voice had an edge to it that was old and structural. "It is extremely not fine, and I am extremely not going to just, I know," Harry said. "But it's over. What I need from you isn't to be angry about what happened. I need you to be here for what's coming." He paused. "If you want to be." The kitchen was quiet. Rain on the Welsh hills outside. "If I want to be," Sirius said, as if the sentence was in a language he was still translating. "Harry. You are all I have left of James. You are all I have left of both of them." His voice had steadied but the warmth in it was enormous. "You are my godson and I failed you for 9 years and I will not," he stopped. "Yes. I want to be here." "Good," Harry said. He pushed a piece of toast across the table. "Then eat something, because Lupin's worried about you and when Lupin worries he hovers and we're going to be in the same cottage for a while." Sirius looked at the toast. Then at Harry. Then something moved across his face that was the first real smile Harry had seen from him, rough around the edges and not quite complete but present, unmistakably present. "You're going to be insufferable," Sirius said, with enormous affection. "Probably," Harry said, and ate his own toast. Pettigrew was found 2 weeks later. It was not simple. It was, in fact, one of the more complicated operations Amelia had described to Harry, because Pettigrew had not actually died in that Muggle Street in 1981. He had cut off his own finger, left it with enough blood to suggest a death, transformed into a rat, and spent 9 years hiding in a Muggle family as a pet. The family was a woman named Molly Weasley's household, which meant it was a wizarding family's household, which meant Pettigrew had been hiding in the open in a place where transforming back and using magic would have been possible at any point. The Weasleys themselves were horrified. This was transmitted to Harry through Amelia's brief and Shacklebolt's somewhat more detailed account, which included the detail that one of the Weasley boys, a redhead named Ron, who was apparently Harry's age, had been keeping the rat as a pet for 3 years and had called him Scabbers and was currently processing the revelation with the particular emotional complexity of discovering your pet was a war criminal. Harry, for his part, felt the situation deserved a moment of pure human acknowledgement. He sat with it for about 30 seconds. Then he filed it underhandled and moved forward. Pettigrew's capture happened in a shed in the Weasley garden at 5 in the morning, which seemed appropriate given the entire arc of his choices. He transformed back under an Horcrux Animagus revealing charm. Amelia had found the legal authority to cast it under a warrant signed by 3 ICW judges, and was arrested before he had finished screaming. He confessed under Veritaserum in under 2 hours, because Peter Pettigrew had spent 9 years living as a rat and had not spent any of that time developing the psychological architecture for sustained resistance. He confirmed everything. The Potter's secret keeper had been switched from Sirius to Peter 1 week before Halloween 1981. Peter had told Voldemort. The explosion in the Muggle Street had been staged. Sirius had been innocent from the first moment of his arrest and had never stopped being innocent, and Pettigrew had watched it happen and hidden in fur for 9 years rather than say so. Harry heard about the confession through Priya, who read him the key points in her direct, systematic way. Harry listened to all of it and then said nothing for a moment and then said, "Sirius needs to hear this from you." "Not me. Go to the cottage." Priya went to the cottage. Harry went for a walk in the Welsh hills and thought about Peter Pettigrew for a while. He thought about what kind of person makes the choice Peter Pettigrew had made, not a brave person, not a strong person, not an irredeemably evil person either, but something more ordinary and therefore in some ways more terrible. A frightened person who had chosen their own survival over their friends and then had to live with that choice long enough that they built their entire remaining existence on never confronting it. He thought about it without rage, which surprised him. He'd expected rage. What he found instead was something colder and more complete, a comprehensive understanding of how fear could eat a person alive if they let it, and a clear decision, somewhere in the chest, that he would never let it eat him. He came back to the cottage at dusk and found Sirius in the kitchen, and Sirius's face told him that Priya had been and gone and the information had been delivered and received. Sirius looked like a man who had just had 9 years partially give him back, not fully, not cleanly, because 9 years wasn't something you just got back, but the specific weight of having been believed to be something he wasn't was gone from his face. Harry sat down across from him. "He's going to Azkaban," Sirius said. "Yes. For a long time. The ICW is pushing for a full trial this time," Harry said. "With proper sentencing guidelines. No irregularities." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said, and there was nothing simple about the word. They sat in the kitchen for a while without talking. Lupin came in eventually and made dinner with the comfortable efficiency of someone who has decided that feeding people is his contribution to any situation, and they ate together, and outside the Welsh hills went dark, and the fire made its ordinary sounds, and Harry thought that this was what family felt like, not grand, not uncomplicated, but present. Reliably, stubbornly present. Dumbledore's trial opened in the second week of December at the ICW's Geneva headquarters. Harry had prepared his testimony over 6 weeks with Priya and had rehearsed it twice with Amelia and once with Hermione, who had peppered him with every possible hostile question the defense might raise until Harry had answers that were precise and sourced and not 1 degree more emotional than necessary. He was ready. He was also, for the first time since August, slightly nervous. Not about Dumbledore. Not about the room or the watching panel or the press gallery that he'd been told would be full. The nervousness was something more specific and harder to name. It was the nervousness of watching something become permanent. The investigation had been moving toward this for months, and he had moved it, pushed it, shaped it from the moment he signed the document at Gringotts. But the trial was the point where it became real in the world's record. Where it stopped being an ongoing process and became history. He was going to stand in that room and say what he knew, and after he said it, it would be said. Sirius drove him to the portkey point, which was a distinction the previous months had not prepared Harry for, having someone who was specifically his person do the ordinary logistics of getting him somewhere. It was a small thing. It landed unexpectedly large. "Nervous?" Sirius said, as they walked. "A bit," Harry said. "James used to get like that before Quidditch matches," Sirius said. "Very calm until right before, and then this small specific thing would show up in his jaw." He glanced at Harry. "Same jaw. What did he do about it?" Harry asked. "Usually I said something ridiculous until he laughed," Sirius said. "But I can't think of anything ridiculous right now, which means I'm probably nervous too." He paused. "Lupin would have something." "Lupin's already there," Harry said. "He went ahead with Priya." "Right." Sirius paused. "How about this, whatever happens in there, whatever Dumbledore says, you already won. He's in a defendant's chair and you put him there. That's done regardless." Harry thought about this. "I didn't do it to win," he said. "I know," Sirius said. "That's how I know you did." The portkey took them to Geneva and the ICW building, which was an enormous glass and stone structure that had the specific architectural quality of a place that had been built to convey authority and had been succeeding for about a century. There were journalists outside the main entrance and a crowd of observers and 4 ICW security staff who escorted Harry and Sirius through a side entrance and into a waiting room that had tea and biscuits and 3 uncomfortable chairs. Priya was there. Lupin was there. Hermione was there with a folder of notes she was reviewing for the 5th time, and she looked up when Harry came in and said, "The defense has filed a supplementary brief arguing diminished responsibility on grounds of wartime psychological pressure," and then, reading his face, "You already know the counter-argument. Voldemort's war ended before he took the dispensation action," Harry said. "By 3 days. There was no wartime pressure when he suspended the soul scan. He did it in a period of peace and institutional authority." He sat down. "It's a weak argument." "It's their best one," Hermione said, which was a different thing. Harry ate a biscuit and looked at his hands and thought about what he was going to say in that room, which he'd said to himself enough times in the past 6 weeks that it was perfectly stored, requiring no active effort to access. He thought about all the things he knew now that he hadn't known on the Tuesday morning when a letter arrived in his cereal. He thought about the shape of his own life before and after. "Harry," Sirius said. He looked up. "Thank you," Sirius said. For all of it. For Priya and for Amelia and for pushing on my case even when you had enough of your own things to deal with." "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Harry said. "You're my godfather. You were in there for something you didn't do because of people who thought they could organize everyone's life to suit a strategy." He paused. "I'm not interested in letting people do that." Sirius looked at him for a moment. "James was like this," he said, quietly. "When it mattered. He went very still and very clear." He paused. "I missed him every day. I'm going to miss you when you're older and even more of a menace than you currently are." "I'm right here," Harry said. "I know," Sirius said. "That's the point." The courtroom was larger than Harry had expected and brighter, which helped. It had the quality of a serious room that had been designed to take things seriously, all pale stone and good light and a raised panel platform where 7 ICW judges sat with the specific gravity of people who had read everything and were ready to hear more. The press gallery was full. The public gallery was full. The defendant's area was a curved booth of polished wood where Albus Dumbledore sat with his solicitor. He looked like Albus Dumbledore. That was the thing that struck Harry first. Coming in, he had expected the man to look diminished by the setting, and he did not. He looked exactly like the portraits Harry had seen, exactly like the figure in every photograph in the wizarding history books, silver hair and half-moon spectacles and an expression of patient attention that had probably disarmed people for decades. He was 70 years old if he was a day, and he had the presence of someone who had spent those decades being the most important person in any room he entered. He looked at Harry when Harry came in. Harry looked back. He held the eye contact for a moment and then he sat down. The proceedings took 4 days. Harry testified on the 2nd day. He walked to the witness platform and looked at the 7 judges and stated his name and his relationship to the case and answered the initial questions from the ICW's lead counsel with the same clarity he'd been building toward for 3 months. He stated facts. He cited documents. He answered every question with the precision of someone who has read the relevant statutes and knows where the edges are. The defense counsel was a Swiss wizard named Fuchs who was very good at his job and clearly knew it. He came at Harry's testimony from 3 angles, which Harry had anticipated. The first was the wartime argument. Harry addressed it as he and Hermione had discussed, calmly and specifically, citing the date of the dispensation document versus the date of Voldemort's defeat. Fuchs moved on. The second angle was Harry's age, whether a 10-year-old could be considered a reliable witness to events he hadn't directly witnessed, for testimony that was substantially about documentation and institutional record rather than personal experience. Harry pointed out that the documentation spoke for itself and his testimony was primarily about what he had directly experienced, his own body, his own soul structure, his own life at the Dursleys, and the clear chain of decisions that had shaped those things. His age, he said with complete equanimity, was in fact the point. Fuchs moved on. The third angle was the one Harry had been waiting for, and when it came it was handled with Fuchs's version of delicacy, which was precision rather than softness. "Mr. Potter," Fuchs said, "is it possible that the actions attributed to Professor Dumbledore, including the guardianship decisions and the dispensation filing, were made in good faith? That Professor Dumbledore genuinely believed he was protecting you?" Harry looked at Fuchs. He was very still for a moment, which he allowed himself, because the question deserved it. "Yes," he said. "It's possible." The room shifted. "I can't know what Dumbledore believed," Harry said. "I can only know what the decisions produced. The decisions produced a child who grew up with relatives who were told nothing about the world he came from. They produced a suppressed medical diagnosis that would have found 9 pieces of a Dark Lord's soul in that child's body and removed them. They produced sealed parental wills naming a different guardian, 2 different guardians, neither of whom were ever contacted. They produced an innocent man in Azkaban for 9 years. He paused. If those decisions came from good faith, then good faith is not a sufficient standard for someone in Dumbledore's position. Because good faith that produces those outcomes is indistinguishable, in its effects, from something much worse. He looked at the 7 judges rather than Fuchs. "I'm not here to tell you what Dumbledore believed," Harry said. "I'm here to tell you what happened to me. And what happened to me is documented, and comprehensive, and a direct result of specific decisions that a specific person made. Whatever he believed when he made them, the decisions were wrong. They caused harm. That's what this court is for." He stepped down. He did not look at Dumbledore. On the 3rd day, Dumbledore testified. Harry was in the gallery. He had no obligation to be there, but he wanted to see it. He sat between Sirius and Hermione and watched Albus Dumbledore answer questions with the careful truthfulness of someone who has decided that the most defensible position is a version of honesty stripped of context. Yes, he had filed the dispensation. He had done so because he believed Harry was a Horcrux target and a soul scan would have created a detectable magical signature that Voldemort's remaining followers could have used to locate the child. Yes, he had placed Harry with the Dursleys despite the wills. He had done so because Lily Evans Potter's blood protection was anchored to Petunia Dursley as the living blood relative, and relocating Harry to any other guardian would have dissolved the protection. Yes, he had been aware of the soul fragment situation. He had genuinely believed, that it would need to be in place until Voldemort returned and could be destroyed. He had believed that destroying the soul fragment prematurely would alert Voldemort and accelerate his return. Yes, he had sealed the wills. He had done so to prevent the contents from reaching Voldemort's followers, who had been actively seeking information about Harry in the immediate aftermath. He had an answer for everything. Harry had known he would. The answers were the answers of a man who had thought about this for a very long time, who had constructed a framework of logic and necessity around every decision he'd made, who had convinced himself so thoroughly that the architecture was right that the dissonance between the architecture and the actual lived reality of a child in a cupboard under the stairs had simply not computed. On the 4th day, the panel deliberated. Harry went back to the waiting room and ate biscuits and read the Sherlock Holmes that Shacklebolt had by this point given him his own copy of, and waited. The verdict came at 4 in the afternoon. Guilty. For charges of willful deprivation under the Sorceress Welfare Act. 2 charges of deliberate suppression of medical diagnosis. 1 charge of unauthorized guardianship claim under fraudulent circumstances. The wills had made his lack of appointment clear. Not guilty on the most serious charge of deliberate soul endangerment, because the prosecution had been unable to prove that Dumbledore had known the soul fragment would need to remain in situ rather than just believing it, and the distinction mattered legally. Sentencing was 3 weeks away. The panel deliberated. Harry went back to the waiting room and ate biscuits and was not particularly surprised by any of it. Not guilty on the soul endangerment, Sirius said, with a controlled anger that had been controlled for 3 days now and was starting to show at the edges. It was the hardest charge to prove, Priya said. The intent threshold is very high. He knew, Sirius said. Probably, Priya said. But probably isn't enough. Harry closed his book. For guilty charges, he said. He was the most trusted man in the wizarding world 3 months ago. He is now a convicted criminal. He will not be headmaster of Hogwarts. He will not be chief warlock. He will not be supreme mugwump. He looked at Sirius. That's not nothing. Sirius breathed. No, he said. It's not nothing. And Pettigrew's testimony means you're completely, officially, permanently exonerated, Harry said. The Ministry has formally expunged the record. You're free in every legal and practical sense. You have your estate back. You have your life. He paused. That's what I wanted. Sirius looked at him. The afternoon light in the waiting room was pale Geneva winter, thin and bright, and Sirius Black was 12 stone lighter than photographs and had grey in his hair that wasn't supposed to be there, but he was present, real, free, and looking at Harry with the expression of someone who has been handed back something they'd stopped believing they'd ever see again. What about Voldemort? Lupin said quietly, from the corner. They all looked at Harry. He had thought about this. He had thought about it since the corridor in Hogwarts, since feeling the presence go east, thin as smoke, looking for purchase. He'd thought about it during the 6 nights in the waiting room and the 4 days in the gallery and the 3 months of operations and the 9 nights of the restoration. He's still out there, Harry said. What's left of him? He'll find a way to reconstitute eventually, not this year, not next year, but eventually. He has no Horcruxes left. He paused. When he comes back as what he actually is. One fractured soul with no anchors and no strategy except the one he's been using for 50 years, which is fear. And it doesn't work on me. It works on everyone, Sirius said. Then everyone will need to get better at it, Harry said, pleasantly. I'll help. Hermione made a sound that was 3/4 laugh and 1/4 something more serious. That's possibly the most concerning thing I've heard you say, she said. Good, Harry said. It should be slightly concerning. It means he's right to be scared. Lupin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you know, James said something like that once, before a very bad situation, and it turned out to be right. He paused. Though he was 17 at the time and you are 10, which is somehow more alarming. 11 in January, Harry said. 11, Lupin said gravely. Completely different. The weeks that followed were the quietest Harry had had since August. Not empty, there was still Sirius's estate to sort through, and the ongoing legal aftermath of the trial, and a significant volume of correspondence from people Harry had never met who had opinions about his situation, and Hermione, who had appointed herself a one-person educational program in the absence of formal schooling and had started sending him books from the ICW library with notes in the margins. He read all of them. There was also the matter of Voldemort, which did not resolve tidily into a quiet period the way Harry had suggested it might. 3 weeks after Geneva, there was a report from Romania of a magical disturbance in an isolated forest that sounded like the specific signature of a possessing entity moving between hosts. A week after that, Bulgaria filed an ICW notice about a dark magic flare in the Rhodope Mountains. A week after that, nothing, and then a month of nothing. Harry tracked these reports on his map, which now had new marks in Eastern Europe alongside the destroyed anchor sites. He tracked them with the methodical attention he gave everything and talked about them with Amelia on the 2 occasions she came to the cottage in December, and they both understood without saying it directly that what they were watching was something conserving itself. Something learning. Voldemort in his current state was not capable of a sustained campaign. He had no followers left who would risk open allegiance. He had no body. He was a fragment of a once extraordinary wizard reduced to finding temporary hosts in the isolated places of Eastern Europe and lying low. But Harry kept the map. On the 27th of December, a letter arrived at the cottage. Not by unusual bird this time, a school owl, brown and ordinary, with a Hogwarts seal on the envelope and his name in a handwriting he recognized immediately as McGonagall's. "Mr. Potter, the Hogwarts Board of Governors has voted to confirm my appointment as headmistress, effective immediately, replacing the position previously held by Professor Dumbledore, who as you are no doubt aware tendered his resignation upon conviction. I am writing to confirm that your acceptance letter for the September intake remains valid under the new administration. I am also writing, somewhat less officially, to tell you that the defense against the dark arts position is currently open, and that I have made an offer to a candidate who I believe you may have encountered. He has accepted conditionally, contingent on several ongoing legal matters being resolved. I expect they will be. There is a room in Gryffindor Tower that has been waiting for 11 years. It will continue to wait until September, at which point I expect you to arrive ready to work. Minerva McGonagall Headmistress, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. P.S. The board has also voted to implement a new welfare policy for all students requiring declaration of home living conditions and annual soul attestation as routine health procedure. It passed 11-2. I thought you should know. Harry read the letter twice. Then he went downstairs and found Sirius in the kitchen and handed it to him. Sirius read it. Then he laughed, a real one, the kind that had been coming back slowly over the past weeks, getting easier and less effortful each time. She offered Lupin the data job, he said. That's what the conditional acceptance means, Harry said. He didn't tell me, Sirius said, with the specific affront of a best friend not immediately consulted. He probably wanted to see if it actually came through first, Harry said. He's careful. Sirius was still grinning. Dada, he said. Moony as a professor. James would lose his mind. Tell him that, Harry suggested, and went to the sitting room where Lupin was reading and where, now that Harry was paying attention with the specific focus of someone who had recently been reconnected with how family worked, the careful set of the man's shoulders said he'd heard Sirius laugh and was still deciding whether to come in. She told me, Harry said from the doorway. Lupin looked up from his book. His face went through several things. Congratulations, Harry said. The careful set went out of Lupin's shoulders. He looked slightly undone, which was his version of visible joy. She said contingent, I'll be 11 in January, Harry said. Hermione's already pulled every statute on werewolf employment discrimination and found 6 challenges to the current legislation that haven't been properly argued yet. She's writing them up. I'd give it 2 months. Lupin stared at him. She does that, Harry said. You'll get used to it. He paused. Also, Sirius is going to come in here in about 30 seconds to tell you that James would lose his mind, so brace yourself. Sirius appeared in the doorway. Moony, he said. James would absolutely lose his mind, Lupin said, and put his face in his hands, and his shoulders were shaking, and Harry went back to the kitchen to give them a minute and looked out the window at the Welsh hills going white with the first proper snow of winter. The snow made everything clean and quiet and specific, each particular thing in the landscape suddenly sharply itself without the softening of color. The hills were exactly themselves. The stream was exactly itself. The cottage was warm and full of people who were, one way or another, his. Harry stood at the window and thought about September and Hogwarts and a year of work to get through before then, and Voldemort somewhere in Eastern Europe being careful and thin, and the map on the table that he'd keep adding to, and Hermione's books arriving with notes in the margins, and Amelia's occasional visits, and the annual soul attestation that was now Hogwarts policy, and Peter Pettigrew in Azkaban, and Lucius Malfoy under investigation, and Sirius laughing in the kitchen. He thought about all of it with the clear, precise attention that was entirely his own. The attention he'd always had and that had always been his, underneath 9 years of everything else. He was 10 years old, and he had removed 9 pieces of Voldemort's soul from his body, and arrested Dumbledore, and freed his godfather, and located and destroyed 6 Horcruxes, and testified at an international trial, and found his parents' wills, and met Hermione Granger on the steps of Gringotts and brought her in from the edges of a story that she was going to be central to whether anyone planned it or not. He'd done all of it in 4 months. He looked at the snow on the Welsh hills and thought about what the next 7 years might look like. He was ready. Chapter 6, The Aftermath. January brought snow and Harry's 11th birthday, in that order. The snow came 3 days before the birthday and settled into the kind of deep, settled quiet that made the Welsh hills look like they'd been like this always and intended to stay. The cottage was warm. Sirius had spent 2 weeks gradually making it more habitable in the way of someone who had been denied the ability to do ordinary domestic things for 9 years and was now making up for it with focused intensity, a repaired window frame, a second bookshelf, curtains that were not the original dust-colored ones but something warmer, a kitchen table that no longer wobbled because Sirius had fixed it at 2 in the morning one night and presented it the next morning with the specific satisfaction of a man whose skills had been unavailable too long. Lupin had contributed 3 rugs and an extensive herb garden plan for the spring that he'd drawn on the back of an ICW memo and pinned to the kitchen wall. It had notes in 3 colors. Harry looked at these things and felt them as what they were, evidence of people deciding that somewhere was worth making good. He didn't say this. He just lived in it, which was the point. His birthday fell on a Tuesday, which seemed appropriate given that the whole thing had started on a Tuesday in August. He came downstairs at 7 to find Sirius already up. Sirius was always up early now, part of the recalibration of a body that had been locked to Azkaban's rhythms for 9 years, and Lupin making something at the stove that smelled like it involved butter and was going to be excellent. There was a cake on the table. Harry stopped in the doorway and looked at it. It was not a professional cake. It was, in fact, slightly lopsided and the icing had been applied with enthusiasm rather than precision, and it said "Happy Birthday Harry" in letters that started large and got increasingly small as the icer had run out of room, so the last Y was about a third of the size of the H. Sirius made it, Lupin said, from the stove, with the specific tone of a man providing context. "I can see that," Harry said. "I can hear both of you," Sirius said, from behind his newspaper. Harry sat down at the table and looked at the cake at close range. The icing was vivid red and gold, which was either Gryffindor colors or just what Sirius had found in the cottage kitchen, and there were 11 candles arranged around the edge in the rough approximation of a circle. "It's the best cake I've ever had," Harry said. "You've only had about 3 cakes in your life," Sirius said. "Still counts," Harry said. Sirius lowered the newspaper. He had the expression he got sometimes when Harry said something about his childhood in the matter-of-fact way that Harry had, where the matter-of-factness was somehow worse than dramatics would have been. He was getting better at not making a face about it. He wasn't completely there yet. "There are presents," Sirius said, in a voice that was making a decision to move forward, which Harry appreciated. There were. Sirius had gotten him 3 things. A book on advanced magical theory that was well above Hogwarts curriculum and had clearly been selected with the specific intention of seeing how fast Harry could work through it, a broom servicing kit for what Sirius described as the Quidditch education that was going to begin in the spring whether Harry liked it or not, and an album, leather-bound, full of photographs. Harry opened the album and looked at the first page and went very still. His parents. Photographs he hadn't seen, not the formal ones from the vault, not the graduation picture or the Quidditch match, but ordinary ones. His mother laughing at something off-frame. His father attempting to cook something that appeared to be on fire. Both of them in what looked like a garden, young and ordinary and present, caught in the middle of their lives. His mother heavily pregnant, making a face at the camera that was clearly directed at whoever was taking the picture. His father asleep in a chair with a book on his face. His parents alive. Not historical, not tragedy, not the boy who lived's origin story. Just James and Lily Potter, who had been people with ordinary Tuesday mornings, and who had loved each other, and who had been waiting in this album for 10 years for someone to hand it to Harry. "Sirius," Harry said. "Took me a bit to put it together," Sirius said, and his voice was very level. "I had some from my own collection. Lupin had some. McGonagall sent a few. Shacklebolt found some in the Order archives that I didn't know existed." He paused. "There's a whole section in the back from when you were born. You don't have to look at it today." "I'll look at it today," Harry said, and turned to the back. There were 12 photographs of newborn Harry. He was impossibly small in all of them and was photographed in the arms of approximately 8 different people, all of whom wore the expressions of adults who have been handed a baby and are managing their feelings about it with varying degrees of success. His father in 3 of them, incandescent in a way that had nothing composed about it. His mother in 2, tired and absolute in the way of someone who has done a very hard thing and arrived at a result that makes all of it make sense. Serious in 1, holding Harry at a slightly alarmed angle with an expression that was half terrified and half the most in love he'd ever been, which was a combination Harry thought was probably exactly right. He looked at all of them. Then he closed the album and set it on the table next to the cake. "Thank you," he said, to both of them, with the full weight of the words. Lupin brought breakfast to the table and they ate it, the 3 of them, in the snowy morning quiet of a kitchen that was warm and smelled of butter, and Harry thought, without sentimentality, without forcing it into larger meaning, that this was exactly what 11 should feel like. Hermione arrived at noon with a bag of books and the specific expression of someone who has exciting information and is choosing the right moment to deliver it. She'd been coming to the cottage every week since December, taking the train from London to Cardiff and the last stretch by a creative application of Muggle transport that Shacklebolt had privately told Harry demonstrated a genuinely impressive working knowledge of the local bus system for someone who'd been in Wales a total of 4 times. She'd started as a researcher and had become, Harry didn't have a clean word for it. A colleague felt too formal. A friend felt accurate but not complete. Someone who was going to be in the same story as him for a long time was probably the most honest. She gave him a book for his birthday, which he'd expected, and a birthday card that was funny rather than sentimental, which he'd also expected, and then she sat down at the table and said, "The werewolf employment legislation challenges. 3 of the 6 have been accepted for formal review by the Gringotts Civil Rights Subcommittee." Lupin, who was washing up at the sink, went very still. "Timeline?" Harry said. "The review hearings are in February," Hermione said. "Priya thinks 2 of the 3 challenges are slam dunks. The third is the harder one, it's challenging the registration requirement, which has more institutional resistance because the ministry uses the registry for population tracking and they'll argue public safety." She paused. "But the employment ones, the ones about preventing someone from holding a job based solely on creature status, those are going to go our way." "Which means Lupin's Hogwarts appointment is clean from February," Harry said. "Almost certainly," Hermione said. "Good," Harry said. He looked at Lupin's back. "Moony." Lupin turned around. "Stop pretending you weren't listening," Harry said. Lupin put down the tea towel. His face was doing something careful that was not quite containing what it needed to contain. "I heard." "Good," Harry said. "It's not, nothing is guaranteed until," Hermione said. "Slam dunks," Harry said. Hermione nodded. "Hermione doesn't use hyperbole," Harry said. "If she says slam dunk, it's a slam dunk." He looked at Lupin steadily. "You're going to be the defense against the dark arts professor. You're going to be excellent at it. And you're going to be at Hogwarts in September when I arrive, which is going to be significantly more convenient than you being wherever you've been for the past decade." Lupin looked at him for a moment with the expression he sometimes got, the one that said he was seeing someone who had James's bone structure and Lily's eyes and something else entirely that belonged to no one but itself. "You're insufferable," he said. "Sirius said that too," Harry said. "It must be true." In February, 2 of the 3 Wizengamot challenges passed. The employment discrimination provisions were struck down on grounds of fundamental magical rights, specifically, that creature status alone could not be used as a disqualifying criterion for employment in the absence of documented risk specific to the role. The third challenge, the registration requirement, was tabled for further review but not dismissed, which Priya described as a significant moral victory if not yet a legal one. Lupin's Hogwarts appointment was formally confirmed on the 14th of February, which was, Sirius pointed out with great satisfaction, Valentine's Day, and which Lupin responded to by throwing a tea towel at him with uncanny accuracy. Harry sent McGonagall a note. She sent back a response that was 6 words, told you. See you in September. In March, the Dumbledore sentencing came through. The 4 guilty charges produced a sentence that had occupied the legal commentary of every wizarding publication in Europe for 3 months, and that was, when it arrived, simultaneously more and less than anyone had expected, 5 years under magical supervision, which meant his wand was registered to a supervisory officer and every significant magical action required filing, and a permanent prohibition on any position of guardianship or educational authority. He was not imprisoned, which the more aggressive commentators found insufficient. He was not free in any meaningful sense, which the more measured ones noted was precisely the point. Harry read the sentencing in the morning with his tea and thought about it with the same careful attention he'd given every development in this process. He thought about whether it was enough. He thought about the word enough, what it meant in the context of what had happened, whether there was an outcome that would satisfy the full weight of 9 years in a cupboard and 9 fragments in a soul and sealed wills and an innocent man in Azkaban. No, he decided. There wasn't. But there wasn't supposed to be. The point of justice wasn't satisfaction. The point was accurate consequence. This is what happened, this is what it cost, this is what the cost requires of you going forward. Dumbledore would live out his remaining years under supervision, stripped of the authority structures he'd built himself inside of, unable to make unilateral decisions about other people's lives. That was accurate. Harry was going to let it be enough. He put the paper down. He went to meet Shacklebolt for their Tuesday morning session, which had been going since January and which was, officially, an informal security briefing about the ongoing Eastern European situation, and which was, unofficially, also a practical magical education that Shacklebolt conducted with the economy of someone who knows what actually matters and doesn't waste time on what doesn't. Shacklebolt had an Auror's approach to magical education, which meant he taught Harry 4 things in their first session and made sure Harry could do all 4 reliably before he added a 5th. He did not comment on how fast Harry learned them. He just moved to the next thing. Harry found this deeply refreshing. By March they were working on things that were not, technically, on any standard Hogwarts curriculum. Shacklebolt presented this without apology. "You're not a standard student," he said. "The curriculum is a floor, not a ceiling. We'll do both." The Patronus, Harry said one Tuesday, looking at the list Shacklebolt had written. "6th year typically," Shacklebolt said. "You want to try it now?" Harry thought about the 9 nights in the healing suite and what he'd used as anchors. The cloud morning. The flower on the windowsill. The warmth of his mother in the dark. "Yes," he said. The Patronus charm, Shacklebolt explained, required the caster to hold a specific and powerful happy memory and channel it through the wand into an expulsion of positive magical force. Most people couldn't produce a corporeal Patronus until they'd been working at it for years. The incorporeal version, just the silver light, no shape, was considered a respectable achievement for a 6th-year student. Harry raised his wand. He thought about the cottage on the morning of his birthday and the lopsided cake and the album open to his father asleep in a chair with a book on his face. "Expecto Patronum," he said. The silver came out immediately and with it a shape, fully formed, bright enough that Shacklebolt took a step back. A stag. It stood in the training room at the Bloomsbury office and turned its head and looked at Harry with silver eyes, and something in Harry's chest pulled hard and then settled, the way something settles when it finds exactly the right place. Shacklebolt looked at the stag for a long moment. "First try," he said. "It's my dad," Harry said. He said it simply, the way facts deserve to be said, but his voice was not entirely steady. Shacklebolt said nothing for a moment. Then, "Keep it a minute if you want." Harry kept it a minute. The stag stood in the middle of the room and its silver light made everything clean and specific and particular, and Harry looked at it and thought about his father incandescent in the delivery room photograph and writing a letter in the vault and trying to cook something that was on fire and being James Potter, who had been a person, who had loved his son, who had been killed trying to protect him. Then he lowered his wand and the stag dissolved and they moved on to the next thing on the list. April, and a letter from Neville Longbottom. Harry had heard the name in the case background, the Longbottom family, Frank and Alice, Aurors who had been tortured to insanity by Death Eaters shortly after Voldemort's defeat, currently residents of St. Mungo's long-term ward. Neville had been raised by his grandmother, Augusta Longbottom, who was by all accounts formidable and demanding in ways that had not been ideally suited to a quiet, internally stubborn boy who found himself unable to live up to the parents everyone told him to live up to. The letter was short, slightly formal in the way of someone who has drafted several versions and is not entirely sure about this one. Dear Harry Potter, my name is Neville Longbottom. You probably don't know who I am. My gran says we should have met when we were babies because our dads were in the order together, but things didn't work out that way. I heard about what happened with you and Gringotts and Professor Dumbledore. My gran says I should call him Professor Dumbledore still as a matter of respect, but also she thinks he was wrong. She's complicated like that. I wanted to write because I've been following it all and I think you were right and I wanted to say that. Also because you got Sirius Black freed and he was my parents' friend too, and I visit my parents every month and I told them about it, and even though they don't really understand things anymore I think they were glad. You don't have to write back. Neville Longbottom. Harry read it 3 times. He thought about a boy who visited his parents in St. Mungo's every month and told them things even when they couldn't understand, because visiting and telling was what you did when that was all you had. He thought about the specific quality of loyalty it took to keep showing up to something like that. He wrote back that same afternoon. His response was longer than Neville's, which he suspected would surprise the boy, and it said several honest things, including that Frank and Alice Longbottom were in the case record as Aurors who had been arrested and tried for their service, that the Death Eaters who had tortured them were all in Azkaban now, that what had been done to them was documented and named and was part of the same body of wrong that Harry's case had helped bring into the light. He said that he was going to Hogwarts in September and that if Neville was going too they should find each other on the train. He sent it. Then he sat at the kitchen table for a while and thought about all the people this had touched, all the lives that had been shaped by the decisions of one year, 1981, that a 10-year-old's Tuesday morning visit to Gringotts had started to properly account for. Neville wrote back in 2 days. The second letter was longer than the first and had a postscript about plants, specifically about a mandrake propagation experiment he was running in his grandmother's greenhouse, that went on for 4 paragraphs with a technical enthusiasm that Harry found immediately and genuinely interesting. He asked Lupin about mandrakes over dinner. Lupin explained for 20 minutes with the specific joy of a former student who loved the subject he was going to teach. In May, Harry visited Sirius's family estate. Grimmauld Place was not what he'd expected, which was saying something given that he'd expected it to be dark and historically unpleasant. It was dark and historically unpleasant in ways that exceeded expectation, but what Harry noticed more than the darkness was Sirius's face when they walked through the front door together. Not the expected grimness. Something more complicated, the face of someone who grew up somewhere and escaped it and has to periodically reckon with the fact that escaping somewhere doesn't erase it. You don't have to keep it, Harry said, on the front step. Sirius looked at him. It's the family estate. Generations of, I know what it is, Harry said. I'm saying you don't have to keep it if you don't want it. He looked at the house. What do you actually want? Sirius was quiet for a moment. I want a house that doesn't feel like a verdict, he said. This one feels like a verdict. Then sell it, Harry said. Or donate it. The ICW's been looking for a London training facility. He paused. You have your own money, separate from the estate. Priya confirmed that. You could buy something that's just yours. Sirius looked at him with the expression he sometimes got, the one that was partly like James and partly its own thing. You've thought about this. I think about everything, Harry said. They ended up donating Grimmauld Place to the ICW, which Amelia accepted with the specific satisfaction of someone who had wanted a London training facility for a long time and was pretending the circumstances didn't matter to her, while clearly being also moved by the circumstances. Sirius bought a house in Edinburgh, 3 stories, old stone, a garden that needed work, near the Edinburgh wizarding community in a way that meant neighbors who understood what they were without requiring explanation. He asked Harry if he wanted a room in it. He asked casually, in the way of someone trying not to make too much of the question. Hogwarts during term, Harry said. Holidays? Holidays, Sirius said. And summers. And any time you want, obviously. Obviously, Harry said, and that was settled, and Sirius made a face that was trying to be dignified about it and failing in the best way. June, and Voldemort. The Eastern European reports had been quiet since March, which was not the same as nothing happening. Harry had kept the map and kept adding to it, and the pattern of the silence, when he laid it out, told a story. The sightings had clustered, moved northwest, and then stopped, not because the presence had gone but because it had found something and stayed. He brought the map to Amelia at the end of the first week of June. She looked at it for a long time. Albania, she said. Albania, he confirmed. These last 3 confirmed sightings before the silence, all within 40 miles of each other in the Albanian forests. And then nothing for 11 weeks. He paused. He's not moving because he doesn't need to move. He's found a host, Amelia said. Or a temporary anchor. Something to hold himself in one place rather than drifting. He looked at the map. Without the Horcruxes, his hold on any host is going to be weak. He can't entrench the way he did with Quirrell. He'll need to be careful. Which means we have time, Amelia said. We have time, Harry agreed, if we use it. He paused. I'd like to go to Albania. The room went very quiet. Absolutely not, Amelia said. Hear me out, Harry said. You are 11 years old, in January I was 10 and you let me testify at an international criminal trial, Harry said pleasantly. I'm not asking to go in wands blazing. I'm asking to go with a team. You, Shacklebolt, whoever else you think is appropriate. I want to map the location more precisely. If he's settled somewhere, we need to know where. Amelia looked at him with the expression she'd been developing since August, the one that had started as disbelief and progressed through reluctant respect and arrived somewhere that was not quite comfortable but was definitely functional. Why, she said. Why do you need to be there? Because I can feel the resonance, Harry said. I spent 9 nights learning to distinguish Voldemort's magical signature from my own. I know what he feels like. I can find him faster than anyone else. He paused. And I can find him without getting close enough to trigger a response. He doesn't know the soul link is gone. He'll expect that I still have a connection to him, which means he won't expect me to be able to locate him without that connection. He looked at her. It's an advantage. Let me use it. She argued for 20 more minutes. Harry answered every argument with the same steady patience he'd been using since August, because the arguments were reasonable and deserved real responses rather than just being dismissed. When she ran out of arguments that he hadn't addressed, she sat back and said, "Fine. With conditions." "Name them," Harry said. She named 6. He accepted 5 and negotiated the 6th, the one about maintaining a 300-meter minimum distance from any identified location, which he accepted in principle but noted should be subject to operational flexibility in the field, meaning if something changed he wanted the authority to make a judgment call. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Shacklebolt goes. 2 additional Aurors. You don't use offensive magic unless there's no alternative." "Agreed," Harry said. "And you tell Sirius beforehand." Harry paused. "He's your guardian," Amelia said. "Whatever you think about involving him, he has a right to know." "He'll want to come," Harry said. "Yes," Amelia said. "He probably will." He told Sirius that evening at the Edinburgh house, which Harry had been visiting for 3 weeks and which was becoming familiar in the particular way of places that are being genuinely inhabited, Sirius's books spreading across 3 shelves, photographs appearing on surfaces, the kitchen developing the specific organization of someone who cooks with enthusiasm and reorganizes things until they make sense. Sirius listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was a significant exercise of self-control that Harry noted and respected. When Harry finished, Sirius was quiet for a moment. "Albania," he said. "Albania," Harry said. "With Amelia and Shacklebolt. And 2 other Aurors. And you." "And me," Harry said. Sirius stood up from the kitchen table and went to the window and looked out at Edinburgh for a moment. Harry waited. He let Sirius have the moment because the moment was real, the reality of being Harry Potter's godfather, of having found him and loving him, and also having to exist in the fact that Harry Potter was not a child who could be kept safe by deciding to keep him safe. That the keeping safe had to include rather than exclude the thing Harry was. "I'm coming," Sirius said. "I thought you would be," Harry said. "You should have told Amelia that," Sirius said, turning around. His eyes were bright with something that was not entirely worry. "I told her you'd want to come," Harry said. "She said probably." Sirius looked at him. "You planned this." "I thought about it," Harry said. "That's not the same thing." A pause. "It's almost the same thing." Sirius covered his face with his hand. But when he dropped it, he was nearly smiling. Albania in late June was hot and green and dramatically beautiful in the way that mountains are when you've been living in Wales all year. The forests in the south were old growth, dense, the specific dark green of a place that had been growing for a very long time without interruption. They came in by Portkey to a safe point 30 miles out and went the rest of the way on foot and broomstick, Amelia and Shacklebolt and 2 Aurors named Torres and Bello who were quiet and competent, Sirius on the broom he'd bought himself and ridden for the first time in May with the aggressive delight of someone getting back a thing they loved, and Harry. They moved through the forest in the late morning when the light came through the canopy at angles and the birds were loud and ordinary, and the magic of the place, which was old and European and had nothing to do with what they were looking for, pressed pleasantly against Harry's awareness. He found the resonance 2 hours in. Not dramatic, not a sudden flare or a cold wave. Just a familiar frequency, a specific wrongness at the edge of his perception, the way a note slightly off pitch intrudes on music, you know. He stopped on the path and went still. Shacklebolt stopped immediately behind him. The others took 3 more steps and then stopped. "There," Harry said quietly. He pointed southeast. "About a mile. Maybe less." "You're sure?" Amelia said. "Yes," Harry said. They went carefully. The trees got older and darker as they moved southeast, and the bird noise faded, and the air had a quality that was not cold but was not warm in the way it should have been in late June. Harry kept the resonance in his peripheral awareness and moved toward it without moving at it directly, the way you approach something nervous without spooking it. The frequency strengthened as they approached. Not powerfully, it was nothing like what he'd felt during the 9 nights, nothing like what had pressed against his chest for 10 years. It was thin and specific and located, which was actually almost more disturbing than strong, because thin and located meant something that was holding itself together with conscious effort. Meaning. The ruin was a house. Or had been, stone walls half standing, no roof, trees growing through the floor, the specific melancholy of a place abandoned long enough that the nature had started making it something else. In the center of what had been a main room, through the half-standing doorway, Harry could see, nothing. Nothing visible. But the resonance was there. 300 meters. He stopped at 300 meters exactly, because he'd said he would and he kept what he said. He stood at the edge of the tree line and looked at the ruin and reached out with his awareness in the way Mira had taught him in those 9 nights, the way Shacklebolt had been refining with him since January, the careful precise reach of someone who knows what they're looking for. What he found was, less than he'd expected and more coherent than he'd hoped. It was not nothing. Tom Riddle was not nothing, not yet. He was thin and held together and carefully conserved, like a flame in a glass, existing, aware, processing. He was in the ruin and he was not in any host, he was just, there, occupying a space, holding himself at the edge of perceptibility. And he was aware. Harry felt the moment Voldemort sensed him. Not through the soul link, that was gone, finally and completely gone, but through the resonance, the specific frequency that Harry now knew the way he knew his own reflection. Something in the ruin went still in a different way. Attention without a face. Harry did not back up. He stood at 300 meters and looked at the ruin and spoke, not aloud, through the resonance, the same way he'd spoken to the fragment on the fifth night, through the fabric of magical awareness. "You're still here." A pause. Long. The birds were not in this part of the forest. "Still here," came back, thin and precise and cold. Not the voice from the corridor, not Quirrell's borrowed tone. Something older. The actual thing. "All your anchors are gone," Harry said. "You know that." "Yes. You'll reconstitute eventually. You're too stubborn not to." The silence had a texture to it. Harry felt, distantly, the quality of a mind that was ancient and damaged and had spent 50 years running from its own mortality, and what he felt toward it was not the fear it had been designed to produce. It was something closer to pity, which he recognized was almost certainly not what Voldemort wanted and therefore was exactly the right thing. "I could help you die properly," Harry said. "The offer stands." The silence stretched. "Why?" "Because you were Tom Riddle once," Harry said. "Before you decided being mortal was a problem you needed to solve. And because what you've been for the last 50 years is a consequence of that decision, and it looks exhausting, and none of the things you wanted from it actually came through." A pause. "You didn't win. You're in a ruined house in Albania being detected by an 11-year-old. The resonance shifted. Not anger, something older and more complicated. The specific frequency of a thing that knows it has lost the argument it has been having with itself for half a century. "Not yet," said Voldemort. "No," Harry agreed. "Not yet. But I'll be at Hogwarts in September. I'll be watching. As will I." "I know," Harry said. "That's why I came. I wanted you to know I know." He stepped back from the tree line. He turned around. The four Aurors and Sirius and Amelia were watching him with varying degrees of professional composure. Sirius's jaw was tight. Shacklebolt's face was carefully neutral in the way of someone who has heard half of a conversation they have significant feelings about. "He's there," Harry said. "Not in a host. Barely cohesive. He's not a current threat." He paused. "He will be, eventually. I've asked Torres and Bello to put a monitoring perimeter on this site, they'll know what that involves. Monthly checks. If the frequency changes they report immediately." He was talking to Amelia but it was for everyone. Practical, clear, transitioning from the conversation he just had with a shade in a ruin to the operational next steps, because the operational next steps were what made the difference between responding and being caught off guard. "That's it?" Sirius said. His voice was controlled and had cost him to control. "That's it for today," Harry said. "You were just," Sirius stopped. He looked at the ruin, which was 200 meters behind Harry now, quiet in its trees. "You were talking to him?" "Yes." "Through, what, the resonance you mentioned?" "Yes." Sirius looked at him. "Are you all right?" Harry considered the question seriously, the way he always did. He thought about what he'd felt in the ruin's direction, the pity and the recognition and the steady undisturbed certainty that he was himself and the thing in the ruin was the thing in the ruin and those were separate conditions that he was entirely comfortable with. "Yes," he said. "Come on. The portkey point is 2 hours back." He walked into the trees. After a moment, all of them followed. September 1st arrived the way things arrive when you've been watching them come, suddenly, despite having been visible for months. Harry stood on platform 9 3/4 with a trunk that had been packed and repacked twice and was now correctly packed because Hermione had come over 2 days ago and applied her organizational system to it and Harry had let her because her system was genuinely better than his. Hedwig, his owl, snowy white, a gift from Sirius who had gone to Elops in August with the energy of someone who had been waiting 11 years to buy an owl and intended to make an informed choice, sat on top of the trunk with the supreme self-possession of a bird who knows she is excellent. The platform was loud and steaming and full of families and the particular texture of a beginning. Sirius was there. Lupin was there, going up separately as faculty, but had come to the platform to see Harry off and was being talked at by McGonagall, who had appeared from somewhere and seemed to be briefing him on something at speed. Hermione was there with her parents, a friendly Muggle couple who had taken the whole thing with admirable equanimity. Shacklebolt was not there officially but was definitely somewhere in the crowd looking professional. Harry had already had the goodbye conversation with Sirius at the house this morning, because he had the sense that doing it on the platform in public would be harder and neither of them needed it to be harder. They'd said what needed saying over tea at 6 in the morning. It was fine. He was going to Hogwarts, not to war, and he would be back at Christmas, and Sirius was going to use the time to finish the garden and probably to drive Lupin slightly mad through the medium of owls. On the platform, Sirius looked at him and said, "Don't blow up anything important." "Define important," Harry said. "That's not reassuring," Sirius said. "I was going for honest," Harry said. Sirius pulled him into a hug that was brief and complete and real, the way Sirius did things when he wasn't performing them. Harry held on for a moment and then let go. He found Hermione in the crowd and they carried his trunk to a compartment in the middle of the train together. The compartment had 2 people already in it, a round-faced boy with a toad who stood up quickly when Harry came in and introduced himself as Neville Longbottom with the specific combination of nervousness and determination of someone who has decided to do the thing he is nervous about. "I got your letters," Harry said, sitting down. "Tell me about the mandrake propagation. Did the second batch take?" Neville stared at him for a moment. Then something in his face relaxed completely, like a door that had been braced shut finally opening normally. "Yes," he said. "But I had to adjust the soil composition and Gran thought I was wasting time, but I was right about the acidity balance." He sat down. "How did you know to ask about that?" "You wrote 4 paragraphs about it," Harry said. "It was clearly important." Neville looked at him with an expression that was the very beginning of what was going to become, Harry suspected, a long friendship. "Right," he said. "Yes. Okay." Hermione was already reading, which was also the beginning of something long. The train moved. London fell away behind it, and the countryside opened up, and Harry looked out the window with his chin on his hand and watched it go past. The map was in his trunk, updated through June. The monitoring team in Albania were on a monthly schedule. Priya had the ongoing legislative challenges in hand. Sirius had the Edinburgh house and the garden and a proper life being rebuilt from scratch, and Lupin had a job, and Neville was explaining mandrake soil composition to Hermione, who was correcting him on one point and being corrected back, and the train was moving north toward Hogwarts. Harry thought about the boy who had been 10 years old in a kitchen in Surrey reading a letter that had arrived in his cereal. He thought about everything that boy had done in 13 months. He thought about the things left to do, because there were things left, there were always things left, Voldemort in an Albanian ruin growing patient and careful, a world that had been organized badly for a long time and needed reorganizing, a school he was arriving at with more understanding of its workings than most of the staff would expect from a first year. He was not afraid of any of it. Outside the window, England was green and enormous and going past, and somewhere ahead the mountains were starting, and above them the sky was the specific blue of a clear September morning, clean, particular, precisely itself. Harry looked at it and felt his own magic in his chest, vast and unobstructed, exactly his, exactly right. He was 11 years old. He had 9 years of other people's choices to finish accounting for, and one of his own parents' murderers still breathing Albanian forest air, and a school full of people who had a mythology about him that had nothing to do with who he was. He was looking forward to it. He watched the mountains come.